5th, 2021 special City Council meeting. We acknowledge we are on the traditional lands of the Treaty 4 territory, a treaty signed with 35 First Nations across southern Saskatchewan and parts of Alberta and Manitoba, original lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. To ensure social distancing measures are being met during this time, some members of council and city administration are attending the meeting today through video conferencing. I'd like to remind those members who are attending through video to ensure your video camera and microphone are turned off. If you wish to speak, use the raised hand function. When speaking, please unmute your microphone and enable your video camera. All votes will be conducted electronically, except for the housekeeping. Delegations will be attending the meeting today through teleconferencing to address council on various items on the agenda. Can I have someone move a motion to approve the agenda at the call of the chair after withdrawing delegation DE 21-320 Andre Nogue, as the delegation no longer wishes to address City Council? Thank you, Councillor Stanichuk. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Moll. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Seeing none. Carried. This one's not more than. I'd like to call upon delegation DE 21-319, Judith Vereshuk and Alyssa Marinos. Please introduce yourself to the record, the organization you're representing, if any, and where you're calling from. You'll have 5 minutes to address City Council, after which you'll have the opportunity to respond to questions that members of council may have for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor Masters and City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. My name is Judith Vereshuk, and I'm the Executive Director of the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District and the Project Manager for the Community Support Program. With me today is Alyssa Marinos, Team Supervisor with the Community Support Program. Alyssa will be available for questions at the end of the presentation. We are here today in support of the recommended allocation of $200,000 as a one-time grant for the continuation of the Community Support Program in 2022. As you know, the safety and security of everyone in downtown has always been a priority for Regina Downtown. Over the years, we have tried to address safety concerns through a piecemeal approach, whether it was providing input to the RPS on the unwanted guests bylaw, hosting safety forums for our members, providing training and educational opportunities for our staff and member businesses, or advocating for better lighting in Victoria Park. Each effort we made was important, however, each effort seemed disconnected from the next. 2020 brought us COVID, which really shone a light on the challenges being faced by the most vulnerable in our community. The lack of vehicle and pedestrian traffic, combined with the closure of many social service and community organizations, created the perfect environment for safety and security issues in downtown and throughout the city. After much research, we decided to model our community support program on the program operating in Saskatoon for the past 9 years. Over the past year, we have worked with Regina Police Services, the City of Regina, and many community-based organizations to develop a community support program that works for downtown Regina. With your generous support, we were able to convene our Community Wellbeing Steering Committee, made up of community members with lived experience, an Indigenous elder, a community-based organization stakeholder, the City of Regina, RPS, and the BID. Our steering committee mobilized this April and worked hard to launch our own community support team. Our team members include Alyssa Marinos, Alejandro Cabrera, Alex Lian, and Del Majore. Since the Community Support Program was launched on June 21st, our team has had walkabouts with Mayor Masters, Chief Evan Bray, Councillor Andrew Stevens, Mayor Conway, the Saskatoon CSP team, members of the Regina Public Library, and several other media-related requests. They've presented at the Anti-Poverty Ministry Board meeting. They've been invited to the bi-weekly CHIP intake meetings hosted by the Phoenix Residential Society, recognizing the CSP team's unique ability to create relationships with individuals experiencing homelessness in the downtown and surrounding area. We have been a great asset to knowing where some of these folks who are who agencies cannot locate. CSP has also picked up over 200 needles since the inception of the program. They've distributed water, coffee, and healthy snacks to individuals in need. They participated in the cold weather strategy meeting hosted by the City of Regina to discuss extreme weather and warming spaces throughout the city. We are still on the lookout for an emergency warming shelter in downtown for the winter months that would operate during the day. We've provided support at the Regina Downtown Cinema Under the Stars event, where they were able to intervene with intoxicated individuals in the park, diverting them from the RPS. They provided support to a community member in making and attending a language assessment appointment in order to register and access support services. They've de-escalated multiple altercations in Victoria Park, reducing the need for RPS attendance. And they've housed 3 individuals who have collectively experienced years of homelessness. They will continue to need long-term support. However, obtaining housing before the winter is a huge win. We have had over 800 hours of on-street presence, and during this time, 51% of the CSP team interactions were outreach-based, meaning mental health, wellness checks, food and water, shelter, and first aid. 15% of the CSP team interactions were education-based, so tourism information, direction, transit information. And 85% of the CSP team interactions were low in severity. As we move through the rest of our pilot year, we will continue to track our activities and report on our successes and challenges. We are pleased with the progress the team has made over the past summer, and heading into a very cold winter, our team will continue to be present and available for our most vulnerable populations. The Community Support Program is identified in the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan as a recommended action under the safety priority. In particular, the action on page 85, expand and support Business Improvement District Community Support and Ambassador Programs. Approving funding for year 2 of the Community Support Program is a tremendous step in the implementation of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Thank you for this opportunity, and Alyssa and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Looking to members of council for questions. I have Councillor Shaw with a question for you.
Hi Judith, thank you for presenting today. I'd like to ask you, you say this is a one-time grant. Why would it only be a one-time grant? Can you explain that to me? Thank you, through the chair.
Sure, through the chair. The pilot project was funded by a one-time grant last year that funded the program through to May 31st, 2022. We are now looking for extension of this pilot program for 1 more year. So the one-time grant terminology is, I guess what we're trying to differentiate is between ongoing operational support beyond this next iteration, so beyond 2023.
Right, so which leads me to, you feel that this can be managed, or you won't need this funding after next year? And why would you feel that, through the chair?
So through the chair, I think that's a great question, and administration will be able to provide additional clarification later on. My understanding is that the city departments are looking at models for social navigation programs that would, I guess, cover a wider area within our community, so beyond downtown. As they continue to do that research and develop that program, we see potentially this program, the Community Support Program, being folded into that effort in the future.
Okay. So, which leads me to the next question. Now, you said that you housed 3 homeless people this year. Can you explain to me, can you walk me through how you were able to help these people, through the chair?
Through the chair, I will defer that question to Alyssa Marino.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so what that took was many days and hours and effort through our team to help folks fill out applications, help them walk down to social services to the building, to wait with them in the waiting room, to meet with staff, to help advocate for what they need to do in the next steps in their process. So applying for and waiting for their IDs to come in. It took going to meetings with Regina Housing Authority to do their intake forms and kind of go through that process. And it took going to and from social services, to Money Mark, to opening bank accounts, and just every step of the process as far as putting in an application for housing through the entire journey, and right to the day that we assisted them in getting their keys from the caretaker.
Thank you for that explanation. What I'm questioning is we have a lot of nonprofit organizations here in Regina that do a lot of that kind of work, the YWCA for one. How is what you are doing taking away from what other organizations are doing that are funded through our provincial government, through the chair?
I don't think we're taking away any work. I feel that a lot of the organizations and community-based organizations, service providers that are doing excellent work right now, they don't have the ability to go out physically and go along with individuals the entire way, the same way that our program is able to. And that's by no fault of their own. They just physically don't have the resources and people to spend the hours a day that that some of these folks need to go through the entire process of obtaining housing. So we have that unique ability to meet with some of these folks where they're at every day throughout the week. And then again, just kind of having that knowledge of what steps need to be taken with their personal situation. Every situation is very different. And so we kind of have that knowledge now of what steps need to be taken depending on where these folks are at in their personal journey in obtaining housing.
Okay, and thank you for that. And I do understand that. I've worked a lot with homeless people and our less fortunate people. I'm just looking at this as maybe this is kind of a lack of service for other organizations that maybe we could kind of do better, or to look into alternate ways. But I thank you for doing what you've done, and I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Thank you, Judith and Alyssa, for coming to speak with us again today. I want to ask you to explain how getting ID, how you've been able to get ID for individuals and how that helps them access different kinds of services through the chair.
Yeah, so having an ID, specifically a photo ID, is kind of like a golden ticket, for lack of a better analogy. A lot of places need bank accounts if they wanted to do direct deposit or have direct deposit from social services and then have rent paid directly, as well as just applying for income assistance. If you're doing it in person, they do require photo ID. And so a lot of these folks, they need income assistance, but in order to get it, they need ID. To get ID, they need money through income assistance. So it's kind of like a vicious circle. And so what we've actually done is taken a few individuals physically down to SGI and advocated for them, and have been successful in getting SGI to kind of waive the fee, which has been very helpful to then getting these folks applications for income assistance and then housing. Normally, if a person has never had photo ID, that wouldn't be possible, but since a lot of these folks have had IDs or driver's licenses in the past, we were able to look them up, and they answered a few personal questions, and then we were able to kind of get the ID sent to either our address in care of, so that we could have
so we could receive it. The other kind of barrier is that if folks don't have physical mailing addresses, they can't get their ID. So that's also kind of another barrier that goes into if you don't have ID, you can't get income assistance, and then if you don't have an address, you can't get your ID to get an income assistance. So there's a whole bunch of things that are kind of layered, but we were able to get these folks' IDs sent to our office, and then once we kind of got housing obtained and set up, we switched their address to their new address. I hope that kind of makes sense. It is a messy journey that we've had to take. It is a very complex system, and so sometimes even explaining it can be quite difficult.
No, thank you very much for that. Through the chair, just one more question, and perhaps this is for Judith to answer. The whole purpose behind this program was in response to complaints from downtown businesses of panhandlers or people coming into their stores or looking for washrooms. Since this program, through this pilot project, what has the response of downtown businesses been? How do they feel about this program?
Thank you for the question. Through the chair, the businesses have been extremely supportive of the program. A lot of them express both complaints and concerns for, their fellow humans that are on the street and are obviously struggling with the circumstances that are in front of them. And while they want to help, a lot of times the business owner or the staff working at the business don't know how. So what our team has been doing is providing some education. We do have safety one sheet that we leave with each business that can stay close to the cash register or their phone that kind of helps them figure out what that triage is, right? So when is it appropriate to call us to help diffuse situations or help someone who might be struggling? And then when is it a call to RPS or to emergency services? Because a lot of them struggle because a lot of the businesses struggle because for so long it's always been just call 911. And as we all know, that just clogs up the system when you are calling 911 because someone is, shouting at the sky downtown. That's taking away resources from more emergent needs elsewhere. So having this in between that can come down, help assess the situation, and determine what the best course of action immediately is. Because sometimes these folks just need a bottle of water or some nutrition in them, right? We all know how we get hangry. I know I do. So sometimes it is just simple nutrition. They just need something in their stomachs, and that helps them kind of get their head back on straight for a little bit. So that's what the team is there for, and it helps the business owners and the business workers, staff, have that outlet to call without fear of bothering 911.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bresciani?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Judith, just in regards to the Regina downtown, I know the fees that you collect from businesses. Is there any portion in the fees that you collect that do go to security at all? Through the chair?
So, through the chair, the levy that we collect from our businesses, that is pretty much the bulk of our funding. We have in the past hired security, more passive security. So we've had folks during the pandemic, I think it was the commissionaires, that came out and did some drive-throughs through downtown. And at that time, we were more concerned about property damage because there was, all the businesses were closed. So we funded that. And then once, things started getting really dire and folks started coming out of their homes or out from wherever they were and kind of coming downtown more, and we're seeing more mental health challenges out there. That's when we decided to evolve from this more of a traditional security effort and move into, like the supportive effort that we are now. So the answer to your question is strict security right now. We do not have any funding going to that. It's all focused on supportive care for the vulnerable population.
Okay, thank you. What was the funding that was last year for the program, through the chair?
Through the chair, the funding allocation was $267,000, I believe, and administration can clarify how much of that was from the City of Regina budget and how much was from the RPS, because there was a little bit of a split there.
Councillor Bresciani, it was $67,000 from the RPS.
Okay. Yeah, I remember the conversation in regards to this. I just off of Councillor Shaw's question, though, I just want to know, though, if this is a one-time, how would it be sustainable, though? That's my question.
I think the challenge that we're facing, and Alyssa can probably chime in this, is that this challenge in our community is so much bigger than what it is. It's not just about finding a home for everyone. It's the mental health check, the physical health check, the reintegration into society, the education piece. There's so many layers that I don't know I don't know what the solution is. All I know is that we're trying to basically build the plane while it's in the air.
Okay.
And I apologize. I don't have like a better answer for you. I don't know if Alyssa might have some insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like sustainability, I think it's not so much as just like a one-time grant would kind of, be enough money to house everybody who needs housing and then, poof, everything's kind of solved. I think it's a very layered and complex societal issue that needs, to have involvement and funding from it to address many issues where including addictions, including mental health supports, including housing, including trauma supports, and a variety of other things, education, budgeting, like numerous things. So it's not so much just like a one-time grant to this program would be sufficient in solving everything. It would be nice to see, consistent funding from the province, from wherever, in order to make a long-term commitment to supporting our community. And that means supporting everybody, starting with, the folks who are experiencing homelessness, mental health addictions, into the long term. And I know that's a gigantic ask. But so I don't really have a straight answer the same way that Judith does, that, a one-time grant is going to be sustainable into the future. But if somehow wrapped into how Judith suggested into the, the community safety and well-being plan that's kind of being discussed, that might be where some of the funding can come from in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Any other questions from council? I have at least one. We appear to have gone down a wee bit of a rabbit hole. Ms. Verasek, could you remind council what the $200,000 is for?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Masters, for the question. This would fund 4 to 6 team members for 1 year, and they would be, and all the ancillary training, supplies, and uniforms, and then the software. So all the program costs would be included in this. So, yeah, and then that $200,000 would be for a 1 year program going from May 22 to May 2023. But basically the whole program all in.
And the community support individuals are brought into downtown to affect what?
They are there to help support the vulnerable population that make downtown their home, in hopes of getting them into actual homes, getting them into jobs, getting them to a point where they're able to actively participate in society. And at the same time, the offshoot of that is to minimize negative impact to the public realm downtown. So, whenever, I think Councillor Shaw alluded to it earlier, the panhandlers that are in front of a business, obviously that negatively affects the business. So if we can begin to house some of these people or find supports for some of these people, then they're not panhandling anymore. They're not in front of Starbucks every day. And hopefully that brings more people into the Starbucks, makes them more comfortable, makes them feel safe going into some of these businesses, and the businesses feel safe as well, that their clients and their staff are safe and secure while they do their business. So really at the end of the day, this is support for our vulnerable populations, and the side effect is a better public realm and a better public facing environment in our downtown.
I turn on my mic to talk to you. Thank you very much for that answer, Ms. Barasek. I see no further questions from council, and well, thank you very much for your presentation, and ask that you please leave the meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
We'll now consider item CR 21-168, a review of unwanted guest. Councillor Stevens is currently absent from the meeting. I will ask Councillor Dan LeBlanc, could you please introduce the report?
Absolutely. So this is essentially, pardon me, I'm just going to pull it up. This is essentially a two-part report. So the primary action item, which we've heard from the delegation on, is looking for renewed, framed as one-time funding to continue the downtown program, a funding ask of $200,000. The second, and I think ask, which is more tied into the core purpose, is a review of the unwanted guests initiative. So as you'll see explained in the report, and I expect from administration, there is a formal process by which Regina Police would get involved in ticketing and essentially enforcing trespass type laws in the downtown community. That happened for some period of time until there came to be some concerns about whether that amounted to recriminalizing vulnerable people downtown, looking for an alternative way to do those sort of enforcements. And so there are various recommendations on how to apply that program differently, and the primary ask within this report is to send that feedback, that data, to the Board of Police Commissioners to examine how they're implementing it. So the core of it is sending this on to the Board of Police Commissioners, although we might have a discussion about it. And the primary action item for us is to renew, or as framed, provide one-time funding of $200,000 for the program we heard about. So we had a good fulsome debate about it at the Community Wellness Committee, and requested that it come to this special meeting of council because it's, I think, such a central undertaking of council over the last few years. So ask for your support on that, but happy to have administration chime in. Ms. Harlock, maybe if there's any additional comments on it.
Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. Can Councillor LeBlanc have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Stavnicek. I'll turn it over to Ms. Harlock to comment on the report.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. So I think the delegation and Councillor LeBlanc summed it up quite well. The only thing I would echo or emphasize is that we have engaged in the project agreement with the Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety to conduct a thorough scan and analysis leading promising practices and programs from across Canada that does focus on the 24-hour non-emergency response, which include but not limited to wellness checks, intervention, and social diversion approaches to support vulnerable communities. So that's that social navigation program. So that analysis, we're just in the way of awarding that contract to do that work, and we're hoping that that work would be done and completed by the end of Q1, and that'll help us form future recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Hawryluk. Any members of council wish to speak to the report? Have any questions? Councillor Shaw.
Hearing what I heard today, dealing with the people that I've dealt with in my past jobs, I'm very offended when people say that panhandlers don't make public feel safe. I have met some of the kindest, sweetest panhandlers and homeless people ever. You give them a coffee and they are the happiest people in this world. You give them a sandwich, they're the happiest people in this world. I don't understand how we as society can say that this is unsafe when you have a panhandler. I understand the concept of getting people into homes. I understand getting them off the streets and finding them a safe place to be. That's wonderful. But to call panhandlers a nuisance and a bother and a threat to people's safety, I am completely offended by that. So for this, I would like to, $200,000, I'm trying to figure out how spending this over and over and over again without getting results, that's my concern. Why aren't we doing something to get results? We've seen this last few months, Camp Hope, Camp Marjorie. People keep doing the same things over and over and nothing's happening. Nothing's getting resolved. Nothing's getting fixed. People are not getting into homes. I've seen it. I've worked with it. I'm trying to get to the point where what we're doing is something that's good for everybody and not just money, 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 and not doing any good with that money. So I'm struggling with this, but I'll hear from administration on more of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Through you, Mayor Masters, a question to administration. Perhaps you can explain a little bit about the history of this and what was happening before. So in terms of panhandling, which was just raised, what was the approach of businesses in the past and why is this new approach being taken? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. I'm going to ask Ms. Husak to go through the history.
Good to go. So the history on the Unwanted Guests Initiative is that it came to being in 2015 after there were a disproportionate number of problematic behaviors that were taking place in the downtown area. So beyond what might just be experienced panhandling, shouting, violent escalating behavior, these sorts of things, requiring lots of calls for service from police. So the Unwanted Guest Initiative came in as a tool for businesses as well as police to not criminalize the behavior in allowing businesses to be able to ban individuals. When this was done, the process as it was before was that these bans would be scanned into the police database and collected, and if in cases where individuals would repeatedly come back and disregard the ban for all intents and purposes, summative tickets could be issued. So that is how it came to be. Now it was reviewed in 2020 by RPS. It was seen as an initiative. It wasn't, the intents in which it came into being weren't aligning with kind of the outcomes that they were seeing. So they did a review of it, and with that made some changes, allowing it to still be a tool that is available to businesses as well as police, but taking off a bit of the potential burden on police, as well as just kind of removing some of the information that's collected on individuals. And it's only, those bans are only assessed now in cases where there are other criminal offenses taken.
Through the chair, so how many, what is the reduction in the number of tickets, bans that have happened since this, with this program in place over the summer? Through the chair.
So there have only been to date, in I believe 2021, or at least the last number that I have, only 19 tickets. Now it's a slight drop in some of the higher numbers that we had seen, particularly in 2018, where there were 63 tickets given. So whether or not, it's a little too early to say that this program has seen a direct, could be a direct input into decreasing the amount of tickets that have been seen, but in combination with the change in the Regina Police's approach, as well as the program better being able to offer social diversion, where the trend is going in the right direction.
So through the chair, so just to summarize, is this correct that instead of businesses calling the police, we have this team on the ground that might be giving out water, might be giving them a sandwich, might be helping them find some social services instead of calling the, and so that it's reducing the number of calls to police.
Ms. Huzak, you might leave your mic on while Councillor Stanczyk is questioning you.
Through you, Mayor Masters. Yes, we can, that would be the intent behind the program, is that we could offer, or the bid would be able to offer an option and be able to intervene a bit sooner in the process and de-escalating these behaviors when they are occurring.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanczyk. I think I'll speak to a little bit of that answer just in terms of commentary. Chief Bray and myself did have an opportunity to go for a walkabout in terms of the Community Safety Patrol. And the general understanding is that we're, I think the comment was made, spending money to get results. And I think this is a way that an avenue for council to support vulnerable people, as well as, you know, in terms of accessing services or meeting immediate needs, de-escalating aggressive disruptive behavior, to ensure the safety of the public and of which includes both businesses and residents. But really it was an avenue of intervention which would have prevented calls to the police. And I know from discussing this with Chief Bray that there have been fewer nuisance calls, and that's specifically in terms of some of what the community support are doing, is de-escalating those calls that there would have had been no other place for other than the police. And so for this number on an annual basis, you're reducing the number of calls into the police, the number of police officers showing up on those types of calls. And so there's a little bit of a return on the investment there relative to the city also being responsible for the police budget. But I've asked Chief Bray for the statistics relative to the calls into downtown, and we can provide that to council at a later date just to follow that up. But that is what he said. Seeing no further questions from council, we'll close off debate. Councillor LeBlanc, did you wish to close off debate?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this program is entirely consistent with the sort of harm reductive approach to social issues that we're seeing in our city, and that I think we're hoping to head toward with the community well-being plan. So it's that someone who's addicted to something or poor or hungry likely shouldn't have to have a very expensive interaction with our criminal justice system. So I think it's good that we are using these folks to have the less sort of intrusive interaction with the level of government. That makes perfect sense, and economically, frankly, it makes perfect sense. Page 49 of the report shows that these skilled workers get paid about $51,000 per year. Regina Police, after 5 years, start making about $100,000 a year. we're clearly paying these folks less. And if they can fulfill many of these jobs, it's well worth leaving police for the bigger fish to fry, which they have plenty of in the city. So I think it's a humane approach. It's consistent with where we're headed, and it's better value for our money. So hope folks support it, and I look forward to another year of the program, and then hopefully expansion outside of the downtown in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. City Clerk, could I ask that you please call the question?
Mayor Masters, the motion carries 10-0. All members present voted in favor, with the exception of Councillor Stevens, who is currently away from the meeting.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. One moment, please, Councillor. Council, we're moving on to Delegation CR 21-169. I would like to call upon Delegation Rhonda Rosenberg. Please introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, if any, and where you're calling from. You'll have 5 minutes to address City Council, after which you will have the opportunity to respond to any question that members of Council may have for you. Good afternoon.
Thank you. I'm Rhonda Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan. Good afternoon, your worship, councillors, and guests. Thank you for both the important work on the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan and this opportunity to address Council. As I said, I'm the Executive Director of the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan. We are a provincial nonprofit organization. We have been raising awareness of the benefits of diversity and the dangers of racism since 1975. Our office is in Regina. I'm actually calling you from my home in Regina today. I join you from Treaty 4 territory, homeland of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, formerly Blackfoot, and Michif nations. We work to build relationships and address colonial harms in our own work and in the community. I personally strive to be a good treaty relative. This meeting happens to fall during Saskatchewan Multicultural Week. This year's theme is Together We Make Saskatchewan Stronger. We encourage conversations about what a strong Saskatchewan means to do and how each of us as individuals and as collectives, such municipalities, can make it stronger. I note that the City of Regina has proclaimed this week, and I thank you for that. I encourage you to visit our website that includes a community resource on building equitable and inclusive communities. MCAS has articulated 5 streams of multicultural work: cultural continuity, celebration of diversity, anti-racism, intercultural connections, and integration. I share these because they are relevant to considerations of safety and well-being. I had the honor of participating in a conversation about the racism and discrimination aspects of the implementation plan. At MCAS, we talk about 4 levels of racism: structural, systemic and institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. The work the city needs to do must include all 4, with initiatives to provide educational opportunities to staff and council in order to build capacity and commitment to consider all policies, processes, programs, and relationships through a lens of decolonization, anti-racism, and anti-oppression. I wish to emphasize the need to devote resources to this work. Permanent staff members who are knowledgeable and experienced in anti-racism and anti-oppression are especially important to moving forward with this plan. Resources for programming and community are also integral, so that the city is able to engage and center the voices of those most impacted by racism and colonialism. Extensive, ongoing, respectful, culturally appropriate outreach is essential. MCAS looks forward to supporting the City of Regina. We are able to offer education as well as connections to organizations, groups, and individuals. MCAS coordinates an annual provincial anti-racism campaign in March in commemoration of March 21st, the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. There are many ways that the City of Regina can participate, support, and amplify the messages and activities of this and other campaigns. I would further encourage the city to consider signing on with the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. This organization provides resources and networking. I am aware that Saskatoon, Prince Albert, and Moose Jaw are already members. I also share an opportunity in this regard. The Canadian Commission for UNESCO, under its program Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities, is collaborating with the University of Manitoba, MyTax, and the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission in providing an opportunity for municipalities in Western Canada interested in initiating diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and I know that the city already does work in those areas. A virtual information workshop for municipal officials will take place on December 2nd at 1:30 p.m. MCUS can provide more detailed information upon request. Please advise me of appropriate contact people. Thank you for your time and consideration as you deliberate how to ensure that all members of the Regina community are safe, valued, seen as contributors, and able to fully participate in access services and feel a sense of belonging in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rhonda Rosenberg. I will open the floor up to any questions that members of council may have. Councillor Stadnichuk.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Through the mayor, Rhonda, thank you for coming. And can you explain a little bit more about the research project that that you referred to, that the Coalition of Inclusive Communities is collaborating with the University of Manitoba, MidTax, and the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission? Is that something that you are suggesting that Regina also participate in?
I can share a little bit more, but I don't have a lot of information. One of our members had asked me to share that with you, and I think it is a good initiative. I would certainly encourage someone from the city to attend the meeting on December 2nd, and that is where you'll get more information. I did send Brad Belgard, who's city staff, I'm losing his exact position, cultural diversity and Indigenous engagement, maybe. And so I don't really have a lot more information than that, but I would encourage the city in general to sign on to the Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities. I think that would be a very good initiative that would indicate that the city is committed to this work, and that it would also offer some opportunities for networking and to gain additional resources as we move forward in this direction.
Okay, thank you.
I see no further questions from council. Thank you very much for the offer of the access to information, and I suspect, well, within the community safety and well-being plan and the anti-racism, that programs such as this are exactly what we looked into. I'll thank you very much and ask that you please leave the meeting now.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Council, we have consultants Felix Munder and Audrey Manette of Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention will be giving us a PowerPoint presentation for report CR 21-169. Typically, presentations to council are limited to 5 minutes. In this instance, however, this was a special meeting called at the request of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan so that this specific presentation could be given to all of council. And so there'll be an exception made in this case, and we'll allow the PowerPoint to conclude to its end, and we'll have and open questions up for council of the consultants. Unless I get indication from any council member that that would be not amenable to them. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon. Felix Munger, and Audrey Minette. I'm going to ask still that you introduce yourself for the record, the organization you're representing, and where you're calling from. You'll have time to conclude your presentation, and then the opportunity to respond to any questions that members of council may have for you. We may allow presentation from administration in between, and are just going to ask that you stay on the line with us until we'll give you the signal that we're good with the questions, or that we're done with the questions. So if you would like to proceed, we'd appreciate that.
All right, thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mayor Masters, councilors, and guests. My name is Audrey Minette. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Projects and Research for the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention. And I am joining you today from Gatineau, Quebec, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And my colleague Felix Munger is going to be joining us just a little bit later, so I will proceed with the presentation first, if that's okay. So I will share my screen so everyone can see the presentation. All right. So as most of you may know, CMNCP has been working closely with the City of Regina on the development of this community safety and well-being plan. And we are very, very happy to be here today alongside the team in Regina to present to you the final plan, including the priorities, some of the proposed actions to address them, and of course, we'll be able to answer any questions at the end. And before I dive into the presentation, I want to say on behalf of the entire team at CMNCP that it has truly been an honor and a privilege to be part of this project. Regina's plan is definitely one of the most comprehensive and in-depth plans that I've worked on. And I do believe it will set a new standard across the country in terms of community safety and well-being planning. It has been such a positive experience working with the City of Regina, having the chance to build relationships and engage with community members. And it was just a very special opportunity, and I wanted to thank you for that. So just a quick overview of what you can expect from the presentation today. So I'll start by providing a bit of an overview of the assessment process. So essentially how we collected the information that supports the priorities that are included in the plan. Then we'll talk a little bit about the key themes that came up during our assessment and how they were prioritized into 6 key priority areas that made it into the final plan. And with that, I'll talk a little bit about some of the high-level recommendations to address those priorities. And then finally, we'll have some time to touch on just a couple of considerations around governance before handing it over to administration to discuss that governance piece in a little bit more detail. And as I mentioned earlier, my colleague Felix Munger is going to be joining us a little bit later in the presentation. So the process of developing a community safety and well-being plan does include a number of different steps, which are outlined on the slide here. So of course, a preparation phase at the beginning, which then leads into really the bulk of the process, which is the assessment. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. Once the assessment is finalized, there's of course a process or an analysis process to identify what the priorities are that are floating to the top, and those priorities are then incorporated into the final community safety and well-being plan, which is what we're here to present to you today. So as I just said, one of the key pieces of the planning process is really the assessment, which essentially involves the collection of different data and information through a number of different sources to really get a better sense of the challenges related to community safety and well-being in a particular municipality. And it's important to have different sources of data to make sure that we have a solid and comprehensive picture of the situation in a community that includes both the actual situation, but also gives us a bit of a sense of the perception and the sense of safety and well-being among the community. And based on that information, so the assessment included, first off, quantitative data. So these are existing statistics, for example, that were made available, Then we had some survey responses, input from a number of key stakeholders in the community, and then a broad range of consultations with different groups in the community. And the idea behind the assessment is really to collect enough information so that we're able to inform a plan that really represents the needs, the gaps, and the priorities locally. So the process of collecting different types of data was quite in-depth and included a number of different approaches and sources of information. So I'll provide a bit of an overview of that process. So as I said, the first component was the collection and analysis of existing data and statistics. And the use of quantitative data is really an important part of this community safety assessment because they can allow to better understand dimensions of a particular issue by, providing answers about what's happening, how much of it is happening, and so on and so forth. It also allows to compare local trends with trends that are happening either provincially or nationally, and just to get a sense of, is there anything that's really standing out or that seems concerning in the community compared to elsewhere? And so to identify and collect the data, we looked at sources of information that were publicly available. So that included things like census data and other resources through Statistics Canada. Then we looked at some of the data available on organizational websites. And of course, we reached out to different partners and agencies in Regina, such as school boards, food banks, crisis services, police, fire department, and so on and so forth. And we asked them to share any data that they have and that they were able to provide. And so in total, some of the topics that were covered by the quantitative piece of the data includes general demographics and then different statistics related to crime, education, employment, food security, diversity, mental health, and much, much more. So the next piece of data that we really focused on was a community safety and well-being survey, which was developed by the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention and the City of Regina, with support from a number of practitioners across the country. And so the survey was open to all residents of Regina through the Be Heard website, which is the platform that was made available to the public to receive updates on the project and to participate in the different engagement tools. So the Community Safety and Wellbeing Survey was administered between February and April 2021. And in that period, so in those 2 months, we got over 1,700 responses that were then collected and analyzed. And the questions were really designed to understand the different perceptions and experiences related to community safety and well-being among the residents of Regina. And then we also included a couple of questions to ask people how different aspects of their lives were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, because we were running the survey during the pandemic. So we really wanted to be able to put some of those results into perspective. And then, of course, the results from the survey were analyzed through different statistical analysis methods, which allowed us to identify if there were any statistically significant differences in the responses among specific demographics, for example. So one example, we were able to compare feelings of safety among people of different genders, ages, ethnic backgrounds, and so on. So another engagement tool through which the public could contribute their thoughts is the Places I Love tool, which was pretty much a mapping activity. And essentially it's a map of the city of Regina, and people could go on there and add a pin to identify different places in the city that they enjoy and where they feel safe. And then on the other hand, they could identify places where they believe there could be some improvement with regards to safety. So maybe they feel less safe or less at ease in those spaces. And then when someone dropped a pin, they could then write just a short paragraph, couple of sentences to justify either why they feel safe or unsafe in that location, and then provide some thoughts or recommendations to improve safety and well-being in that space. And then again, those results were analyzed and allowed to do a bit of geographic mapping to get a sense of any spaces that we should pay particular attention to. And as I mentioned earlier, to provide a more comprehensive understanding of the strengths and challenges related to community safety and well-being, we also conducted a number of consultations with the community. And these consultations were really focused on gathering input related to, again, people's experiences and perceptions of safety and well-being. So it provided insight that was a little more in-depth about how people really feel in the community. So for the consultations, we adopted an approach that was very much intersectional. So the aim was to center the voices of groups or individuals who tend to be sometimes underrepresented, silenced, or simply overlooked in these types of planning processes and conversations. So in total, there were over 20 consultations that were conducted with various groups in the community. You can see some of those groups on the slide here. So we consulted with members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community, Indigenous peoples, newcomers and immigrants, older adults, people with disabilities, youth, and so on. And I do want to quickly take a moment to acknowledge that despite this process that was very comprehensive of engaging with different segments of the population in Regina, we of course did face some challenges due to COVID-19 during the consultation process. So we did have to adapt our approach to conduct the consultations virtually, and we did face situations where some potential participants were not able to attend the sessions. We did hear as well that a lot of folks were just kind of exhausted or zoomed out is how we started to call it, from all the virtual meetings and virtual sessions. And because of that, I did want to just take a moment to sincerely thank everyone, every single community member, stakeholder in the community who participated in the consultation sessions, despite the challenging circumstances that we were faced with. And one more thing with regards to the consultation process is that I wanted to highlight the really amazing contributions of youth in the community through the Youth Photography Project. So when we were identifying the different consultation approaches that would be adapted to different groups, there was kind of this sense that bringing in youth to sit on a 90-minute virtual focus group just might not be the most effective way to truly capture their thoughts and their ideas. So the project team came together and identified that a more effective way to engage with youth from Regina would maybe be to have them participate in a photography project. So we brought in a local Indigenous artist, photographer, filmmaker, educator, and she was able to provide a virtual photography workshop for the youth. So gave them some basic tips and tricks on how to take photos on a simple device like a cell phone, and then included some information on how to tell a powerful story through photography. And then participants were asked to go out and take some photos, once again, of spaces where they feel safe and happy in Regina, as well as areas that make them feel less at ease or less safe. And for each photo, they were able to provide, again, a bit of a description of why they feel that way in that location. And what you can see on the slide here is that we actually compiled all of the photo submissions onto a website. And the web page is available here at the bottom. And so all of the photos are featured, and so everyone who participated is able to see their work reflected, and it allows members of the community to kind of get a sense of what youth are saying about their sense of safety. And this was, of course, included in the plan as well. So once all of that information from the assessment was gathered, we of course went through an analysis process to identify what the key challenges or pressure points were that we had heard by looking at the data that's existing, but also by talking to different groups in the community. So on this slide, you can kind of see the challenges that we identified based on that assessment. So they of course include a wide range of issues, including crime, the service system, domestic violence, and then things like roads, for example, so road safety, racism, and a number of additional challenges. Now, obviously, when a community decides to develop a community safety and well-being plan, it's not possible to address every single theme at once. That would be like trying to boil the ocean, becomes very overwhelming, and is not the most effective way to plan. So on one hand, it was so important for us to reflect everything we heard in the plan to make sure that the community's concerns are reflected in the document, but also to go through a process to identify some of the key priorities moving forward with the plan. So with support from the project team, as well as the Regina Human Services Partnership, we used different tools and matrices to go through a process to really prioritize those themes and identify what the priorities were going to be, so what the main focus of the plan was going to be. So here is just an example of a tool that we used during the decision-making process. So just these matrices to help us think of what kind of actions make most sense in a plan of this nature based on how urgent or how important they are. And then very quickly, this is another example of a matrix that supported that prioritization process. So again, focusing on efforts and impacts. So making sure that we're focusing on things that are having an impact, but that are not, that don't require too much effort, that they're not actually doable. And then, of course, in addition to those tools and processes, there were some discussions around what themes were identified as being the most urgent by the community, maybe actions or priorities that don't already have a sector or a group that are actively addressing them, and so on. And so through that prioritization process, we were able to identify the 6 key priorities for the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And again, I want to reiterate that all of the themes that we heard are reflected or mentioned in the plan, but these 6 priorities really became the focus for the implementation action items moving forward. So from that big list of challenges that I showed just a couple of slides ago, these are the 6 key priorities for the plan, and they include domestic and intimate partner violence, food insecurity, problematic substance use, racism and discrimination, safety, as well as the service system. And so for each of those 6 priorities, there's a set of initial action items that was developed to identify, okay, well, how are we going to address those priorities? And these recommendations and these action items are based off of the ideas proposed by the community during the various consultation sessions, but they're also based off of some feedback from stakeholders in Regina, some members of our team at CMNCP, but also a national review where we sent out the priorities to experts and practitioners from across the country who have been doing this work, leading this work for a number of years, and they were able to have a look and again provide some ideas of potential approaches that have been used elsewhere to address the different priorities, and that could potentially inspire some of the actions for Regina. So as I said, the first priority is domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So according to data from Family Service Regina, there was an increase in referrals and active files between 2019 and 2020, which did suggest that domestic violence and intimate partner violence had increased in Regina since 2019. Of course, we know that a number of those issues were exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic, but domestic violence was also mentioned a number of times during the consultations as well as in the survey as an issue that had been prevalent before the pandemic as well. So you'll notice in terms of the recommendations that for each priority, one of the key recommendations is to establish a community action table or a CAT for that specific topic. So in this case, the community action table would advance, oversee, and provide accountability for approaches to address domestic and intimate partner violence in Regina. In addition to that, some other recommendations include implementing initiatives to prevent violence from occurring in the first place. So we can think of things like programs to prevent dating violence or various educational approaches or resources to foster healthy masculinity, for example. Another recommendation was establishing supports and services for survivors as well as for perpetrators and their families. Strengthening services to identify and offer support in situations of domestic violence. So things like offering bystander training, for example. And then, of course, ensuring adequate emergency response supports are available for people who are fleeing violence. The next priority is food insecurity. And again, so one of the recommendations is establishing a community action table, which could do things like conduct food systems mapping, community research on food insecurity. Next is ensuring that basic food needs are met while ensuring approaches to address food security, to strengthen food systems, and to support residents in achieving their diverse food needs. And similar to that is increasing access to healthy food and water for all residents, as well as addressing issues of food affordability. And lastly, there was also a high-level recommendation to support and develop opportunities for urban agriculture in Regina. The next priority is problematic substance use, and some of the recommendations that we heard with regards to this include preventing and reducing addictions, overdoses, and the harms associated with drug use, decreasing the presence of needles in public places, of course, reducing the stigma surrounding substance use. So that could be done, for example, through various educational resources that support a shift towards humanizing language, for instance, as well as increasing education and awareness on problematic substance use more generally. Priority 4 is racism and discrimination. So one of the key things we heard related to that priority was concerns around racism toward Indigenous peoples, and we heard this both in the consultations as well as in the survey, where a couple of participants indicated that this is prevalent in Regina and that they would like to see steps taken to address systemic racism and discrimination, but also to educate people and to develop efforts that are collaborative and that would work towards eliminating violence or racism. So some of the high-level recommendations related to this include, once again, establishing the community action table, which could serve to provide accountability for anti-racism, anti-oppression work. Then, as I said, recognizing and rejecting racism and discrimination in Regina, as well as supporting individuals in accessing safe spaces and services, and providing opportunities to create diverse and inclusive workplaces. Next is safety, which seems quite broad, but does include a combination of the actual and perceived levels of crime, harm, and safety within the community. So it is quite a complex priority, but it can be measured through different indicators such as how people express their sense of safety in the city, or, are they hesitant to visit or spend time in certain areas, for example. And in terms of some of the recommendations to address safety, they include things like focusing on upstream prevention and early intervention, addressing concerns related to social disorder and physical safety, providing information and awareness on the realities of community safety, and then also enhancing incident response. And last but not least is the priority around the service system. And again, as you can imagine, this could include a number of different things, but it's really rooted in the idea that in order to increase community safety and well-being, these priorities must be approached collaboratively through systems change, and making sure that all various sectors come together to address some of the risk factors that lead to crime and insecurity. So in terms of recommendations related to this priority, The creation of the community action table could allow to conduct systems mapping to identify are there any unmet needs, and then also developed an evaluation framework. In addition to that, another recommendation is to pursue a collective impact approach for the service system in Regina. So again, that can include a number of different actions, such as seeing if there's any opportunities for integration between case management platforms, for example. And then the last recommendation is increasing just the overall accessibility, inclusion, and centralization of services. So that is a very quick overview of the priorities and some of the actions, and I know that's an incredible amount of information, so I do want to remind everyone that it is available in the plan in much more detail. But before wrapping up, I wanted to quickly touch on the section on governance, because obviously implementing action items to address those 6 priorities in Regina does require a strong governance model. And often when we think about ownership or governance of a community safety and well-being plan, and we see this in a number of communities across the country, there tends to be some finger pointing or trying to identify, which sector or stakeholder should take the different priorities on. But the idea with this plan is really to recognize that every sector plays an active role in community safety and well-being, and that the key to success is to have a response that's collaborative, that's coordinated, and that leads to all those systems working together. And that's really what the governance model should promote and should allow. It's really about that culture shift to acknowledge the collective role in addressing the challenges or the priorities. So there are a number of national and international agencies that have identified a list of key factors or elements that need to be in place for the implementation of a community safety and well-being plan to be as successful as possible. The first element is systemic change facilitated through some kind of permanent office or organization. And the task of that office is really to mobilize systems and community interactions and to be the catalyst for change. So that can include things like facilitation, coordination, managing the different plan activities, and so on and so forth. The second element is informed by science and data. So of course, it's important for the implementation to be grounded in the community context and wisdom, but also rooted in evidence, which is available through various sources. Ongoing assessment and evaluation. So again, as we talked about, we know that successful plans are based in an assessment of those local priority issues, and then having targets to make sure that we can measure that those issues are being addressed effectively. Next is mobilizing sectors able to tackle priorities. So this is really about bringing the different partners to the table, making sure that everyone is working together, and establishing some kind of table where people can come together to have those conversations. Next, of course, is adequate and sustained funding. We've seen, again, across the country that offices that have secure funding and don't need to raise funds on an ongoing basis to sustain their momentum are more likely to reach their goals and to be successful. Standards and training for human talent. So again, for the implementation to be effective, it does require a knowledge base or a skill set that comes with training for the staff or the coordinators that are leading that work. Public-supported engagement. We know that the engagement of the public is quite an important factor throughout the entire lifespan of the plan. So from its development all the way to, the final days of its implementation. So making sure that, members of the community, people with lived or living experience are centered in that process, and that their voices continue to be heard throughout the implementation of the plan. And last but not least is championship. Again, we've seen that when local leaders such as the mayor or councilors or the chief of police or local elders when they advocate for the approaches and they talk about the plan and they become champions for the plan, that just has so much capacity to generate support more broadly and leads to some really, really positive outcomes. And lastly, as I said, all those elements for success should be combined into a strong governance model or structure. And of course, different communities have different models that each have their strengths and kind of fit within the needs of that community. And so in Regina, there were two models that made a lot of sense in the context of the city and its needs and the objectives of this particular plan. The first one that we looked at being a government-community partnership, which in a model like this, staff are housed within a department in the city that's typically linked to the mayor's office, and then they have a roundtable and they're charged that they take direction from and are charged with implementing the different priorities. And then the second model, and that is ultimately the model that that administration is going to kind of present to you today for recommendation, is an external community organization that operates at arm's length from the city. So an example of a model like this one is Reach Edmonton, which is really a backbone organization for crime prevention and community safety efforts. They work very, very closely with the city of Edmonton, but are a standalone body. And these external organizations do tend to have the greatest level of autonomy. And their role, again, is to lead or coordinate the implementation of the plan's actions. So they do have also capacity to raise additional funds, to become a hub for different community actions, and they have the capacity to be highly responsive to various situations that come up in the community. And so I do want to stress that even in an external model like this one, the city or the municipality still plays a key role in the implementation. So in Edmonton, for example, the city staff work very, very closely with the team at Reach Edmonton. So it's really part of the systems approach in which the community or the city continues to play an important role and is part of all the discussions, but the day-to-day coordination and implementation is led by that external organization. And so on that note, that's kind of the very broad overview of a very comprehensive process that led to this plan. So I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Shelley, Mr. Slater, and Ms. Husak to kind of take that information and present to you what administration is coming forward with in terms of recommendations.
Council, I'll ask that you mute your computer. Thank you. I believe administration would like to follow that up prior to opening up to questions of the consultants. Administration would like to add on to that presentation, and we'll have questions open up after that. Ms. Howrelick.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. So now that you've heard from Ms. Monette about the overview of the plan itself, we'd like to share a quick presentation with you that outlines how the city can play an early leadership role in the plan's implementation. So we've shared a lot of information in earlier discussions with council, but today our presentation reflects on our final round of consultation with the community and our recommendations as we move forward. So throughout our engagement on this plan, we've heard from the community that what is needed is change at the systemic level. As you heard from Ms. Monette, this type of change requires leadership from the top, elected officials, and those at the executive level of our partnership organizations who have the authority and ability to influence system-wide change through collective actions. The community sees our municipality as the organization that should lead these discussions. Our scans across the different jurisdictions who have made progress with their plans have confirmed that we are on the right track. This doesn't mean that the city will begin delivering services outside of our jurisdiction, but rather that the city can play a leadership role in convening our federal and provincial partners alongside our community organizations in a coordinated manner with resources and support to take action. So the plan we are outlining follows thoughtful conversation with sector experts from across Canada and the local community leaders. We've heard us share this before. We've heard from the community that the city has been seen as a leader during COVID, as we found new ways to serve our most vulnerable citizens through this pandemic. Our proposed path forward respects the relationships we've been building and continues to empower and enable action that is grounded in the lived experience of residents in our community. So there's 3 elements we're going to cover in our presentation. We're going to talk about our proposed government structure, our governance model that we're recommending to council, the short-term action plan that we're recommending, and our proposed path forward with immediate next steps. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Shaley to discuss the governance models.
Through you, Mayor Masters, this first slide just provides a quick reminder before we go any further. This is the safety and well-being framework that we used in our planning process. The city's traditional work has focused on the red incident response circle, work that's mostly done by fire and police, as well as the yellow risk intervention ring, which really encompasses community programs like some of you are familiar with, TRIP, the HUB model, and the violent threat risk assessment protocol that the city is a partner of. This plan is about expanding our work to the outer prevention and social development rings. It's really about addressing the social determinants of crime and well-being. So our proposed governance structure and our short-term action plan for city administration to touch on each ring within the framework. As Ms. Hawryluk has talked about earlier, the need for a governance model that supports discussions, there's a need for the governance model to support discussions in the community that will lead to system-wide change. Our research has shown that there are really 2 types of governance models that are common in Canada today and successfully operating, and Ms. Monette touched on each of those in her presentation. The first is an office that's led by a team of municipal staff with oversight and direction coming from a cross-sectoral leadership group representing education, justice, policing, social services, health, as well as community and Indigenous leaders in the business community. This group works alongside community tables who are positioned to propose solutions and take action. This type of model exists successfully in Lethbridge and Waterloo today. They've made significant progress in getting their federal and provincial partners around the table to take collective action. The second model is an arm's-length nonprofit organization that reports to a board of directors with funding from the municipality and potentially other partners. This second model also makes use of the cross-sectoral leadership group that advises the board of directors. Edmonton is an example of a municipality who started in-house and eventually transitioned to an external model. We've had some conversations with them, and they've advised us that when they made the transition, they recognized that some staff needed to stay within the municipality to lead the city's role in implementing the plan. Again, as Ms. Monette has described, it's part of that system-wide approach to collective action. Other staff moved out to the new organization, which is now called Reach Edmonton. And our next 2 slides provide a high-level illustration of what these models could look like in Regina. So the structure on this slide lays out a framework for a CSWB office within the municipality. Key elements of the structure are the 2 boxes in red, the Mayor's CSW Leadership Committee. This group would have representation from policing, education, health, justice, social services, as well as community, business, and Indigenous leaders. And this would be a table of influence that would work at a cross-sectoral level on system-wide change. The CSWB community action tables over to the right of the diagram would be formed for each of the 6 priority areas that you see described in our plan. In other words, there would be 1 table for food insecurity, another for racism and discrimination, another for problematic substance abuse, and so on. These action tables would take direction from the Mayor's Leadership Committee and would be tasked with taking action on the 6 priorities that are laid out in the plan. We also heard through our consultations that we'll only be successful if resources are in place to support those who are tasked with taking action. So these 2 red boxes would be supported by city staff, including a managing director, who would take direction from the Mayor's Leadership Committee. The office would have staff with experience in policy development, data analysis, evaluation, and community engagement, and would support both the CSWB action tables as well as the Leadership Committee. We're also suggesting that this office would help coordinate implementation of the plan to end homelessness, which is highly aligned with the CSWB plan and involves many of the groups who are engaged in this work. Because the priorities are very much tied to the inequalities that are faced by our Indigenous community and equity-seeking groups, it will be very important for this office to be aligned with any diversity, equity, and inclusion work taking place in our organization. And we heard our delegation, Ms. Rosenberg, speak to the importance of that as well. Our next slide illustrates what an external organization would look like. The elements are similar. However, the leader of the office would report to a board of directors rather than the city manager. The external office would lead the implementation of the plan and would also play a role in supporting coordination of the implementation of the plan to end homelessness. As well, we've added a box with a light blue border to reflect a long-term transition of our social development grants to this office in an effort to ensure alignment. There's potential for this office to also distribute funding from other levels of government as progress is made on a systemic level, and we've seen that happen in some of the other municipalities that we've talked with. So our proposed path forward, sorry, we're missing a slide. Our proposed path forward is to advance the development of an external structure to lead the work. When we were doing our final round of consultation, we heard a few advantages of this structure that are outlined in the reports. Benefits include the potential of the structure to address gaps in coordination of services. It allows budget requests to go direct to council in a manner that's similar to corporate partners like Economic Development Regina, the Provincial Capital Commission, and REAL, rather than competing with other operating asks. There's a long-term potential for the organization to allocate resources from other levels of government and to leverage funding from the private sector. There's a perception that an external organization can respond more quickly to emerging issues in the community, as it would work with fewer internal processes than the city organization, and some spoke of the need for a long-term commitment that is not influenced by changes in political leadership. So that's an overview of our work on governance, and I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Slater, who will walk you through the key elements of our short-term action plan.
Through you, Mayor Masters. Thanks, Ms. Shaley, and good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We would now like to take you through a quick look at our short-term action plan. These are the items that we have pulled from the Safety and Wellbeing Plan that we see the city playing a leadership role on immediately. This does not include all areas that we would play a role on, rather some quick wins where the city can use our resources and services to align. The next few slides are organized in such a way that shows actions in relation to the CSWB priority areas, which CMNCP has walked us through already. Some action items do cross several priority areas, which I'll note throughout the discussion. The key takeaway on this point is really emphasizing the intersectionality between the priority areas that we are focused on within the Safety and Wellbeing Plan. When beginning to take action on the Safety and Wellbeing Plan, there are some initial steps that will be important for ensuring community capacity, such as establishing alignment between the CSWB priority areas and the Community Investment Grant Program, with an initial step including commitment to harm reduction approaches through permanent grant funding from the city. The administration will also look to ensure that other priority areas are reflected within the social development stream of funding. With the priority of safety, it should be noted that action items that appear in other areas, for example, under the service system, also have strong alignment with the priority of safety. For example, establishing a 24-hour social navigation support program and increasing services and spaces in downtown neighborhood would benefit overall safety. but also assisting community members with access to services through these navigation programs. Other actions under safety would include a comprehensive review to identify locations to install a public help point system and enhancing collaborative public safety interventions by strengthening the city's violent threat risk assessment procedures. For problematic substance use, a first and immediate action would be to develop a terms of reference for a local working table and to fund the development of a long-term comprehensive overdose prevention strategy for our city. And in the meantime, commit to long-term funding for harm reduction approaches through the Community Investment Grant Program, where harm reduction approaches are meant to alleviate immediate harms and risks of overdose. Further, we would continue work on increasing locations for needle drop boxes and work to establish naloxone training opportunities for staff providing community services. For the priority of racism and discrimination, we would recommend initial actions consist of the establishment of an internal working group that would be focused on the development of city-led anti-racism and anti-discrimination approaches. Other actions should focus on anti-racism and trauma-informed training and a focus on increasing job opportunities for Indigenous and newcomer youth through city-led mentorship and fellowship type models. For domestic violence and intimate partner violence, we see initial actions to ensure alignment with community investment grant priorities and continue to support the YWCA in the establishment of the Center for Women and Families, which is strongly aligning with plan recommendations for establishing spaces for women and families to heal together. Initial actions with food security would see a collaborative approach between the city and public health to undertake a mapping exercise and service review, and for the city to explore the use of our neighborhood centers as community food hubs, expanding production, distribution, and education. Under access to services, we would recommend continued support for the RDBID community support model, as well as completing work on an analysis that is currently underway on the development of a neighborhood-specific social navigation program. Further action will also need to be taken on the establishment of 24-hour services and spaces, particularly in the downtown, Heritage, and North Central communities. I'll now turn it back to Ms. Harlock.
Thank you. So this slide, it provides the budget outlined in the report. It's important to keep in mind that the salaries and benefits reflected here are based on city salaries rather than the salaries and benefits that could be expected to be found in the not-profit sector. This has been done as a placeholder because council has yet to determine its approach going forward. However, I wanted to emphasize that the amounts you see on the slides are in preliminary budgets and will be flexible in terms of how the funds were spent once council approves an approach. So regardless of which model is chosen, we are proposing an office with two staff who possess the skills and abilities to address the systemic level changes described in the plan. Specific skill sets include a leader of the office, policy and evaluation, engagement expertise, and administrative support. The $210,000 has also been budgeted for community projects, office expenses, engagement, and communications. And we are asking for a one-time funding of $75,000 to initiate an overdose prevention strategy called for in the plan as work for the office to undertake. So this totals $730,000 to operate an external office, which roughly includes 60% of the external office budget in staffing and 40% in project work and support. Additionally, there is still a significant amount of work required as part of the city, as you heard from Ms. Monette, required to support the city's role in implementation of the plan. Therefore, we are recommending 1 FTE within the administration as part of the budget ask, and that item on the slide is the last item is to allocate $500,000 in the harm reduction funding. So this is all in the preliminary budgets that you'll see on the 15th, 16th, and 17th. So, of course, as I said, this is preliminary budgets, and it provides a point of reference that will be subject to change once the structure begins to be put in place and further details are known about the form of the organization. So we'd be happy to answer any questions that you would have about the report or the presentations. We have Mr. Munger online, Monette, and then the staff here and myself.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shigley, Mr. Slater, Ms. Husak, and Ms. Howerlick. And thank you as well, Mr. Munger and Ms. Monette. I'm going to open this up. No, I'm not, actually. We're not going to open it up for debate until we put the report on the floor. I remembered what my job was, folks. Just give me a minute. We'll now consider item CR 21-116. Hang on a second. Thank you. Just to clarify, this is my confusion. We are going to deem the consultants as to not be delegates, but rather part of the administration team presenting the report. Apologies for my confusion. We'll now consider item CR 21-169, Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. Councillor Stevens, could I ask you to please introduce the report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think administration has provided a very detailed response to some of the leading concerns and questions we had at committee. I really want to thank the consultants and city staff who worked on this endeavor. It's quite an accomplishment, and I'm very proud to see this come forward. I'll leave it at that. I know there's other members of council that will have plenty of questions, but I just want to thank everyone and administration for clearing up some of the concerns we had about staffing and how the number itself is actually flexible going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Can Councillor Stevens have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Stanachuk. Members of council, who would like to speak first? Councillor Stanachuk, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. Through you, Mayor Masters, I'm wondering if either the consultants or our city staff can give an example of one of the other cities' approach to a particular problem using this kind of governance model. So either Edmonton or Lethbridge, but a particular issue that they tackled and how this model allowed them to tackle that issue. So I'm not sure who would want to respond to that, but I want to kind of see concretely how this can be done.
Ms. Harlech.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. So I'll ask Mr. Munger to provide an example.
Through the chair, thank you. It's a very, very valid question. It's a very good question, and we get it quite often. One of the core ways of thinking about this, of course, is that safety in a city is a complex issue, and what this plan does more so is it develops a framework and a way of thinking about a city and the complexity of interrelated challenges, be it poverty, addictions, racism, how they come together. And what ends up happening is oftentimes that then through this, tables come together that are saying we are going to address this. And it becomes a very focused addressing. It becomes a way of thinking about an issue and addressing an issue that's really focused, that brings the right people together. Because one of the things we've seen in communities across the country is that something is talked about a lot, and then it suddenly becomes a problem. It's this magic, if you say it 3 times, it's true. And so we have seen in the past where communities have tried to respond to something that they then realized they didn't do a proper assessment for it. An example, though, where an organization that has come up a number of times in this context is Reach Edmonton addressing a particular issue. And in the case of Reach Edmonton, the challenge was that they, working with the police services, were identifying they had tens of thousands, I believe, calls on an annual basis that were to police that were not criminal or matter. And that there's nothing new. There's really nothing new to this. We know this from federal government statistics. 60 to 80% of all calls to police are not crime related. And the police were saying, we're not actually doing what we're supposed to do. So Reach Edmonton, and I think it's a really great example, Reach Edmonton brought together the relevant community partners and developed something they called 24/7. And 24/7 is not a direct thing of a plan, but it's it comes through a plan, through an assessment, this idea, and what it does, it essentially, if I were to see, or you were to see someone in Edmonton who's struggling with intoxication or with mental health problems, instead of calling 911, I would call 311 or 211. I don't live in Edmonton, so I'm not really 211. I'm not really sure which one it is. And a separate unit would go out. They have moved this into a place where if there's a 911 call and a concerned community member said, there's something going on, and I think, and then they'll say, is it, what kind? And they say, oh, I think somebody's really intoxicated. Then 911 will actually not send police officers, which frees up the police to do what they're intended to do and deal with crime in other places. And another group is actually working on this, and it has had an enormous impact on the police force in terms of freeing up. And I think this is one of the best ideas on and ways to think about how an organization like that can be nimble and fast and respond and bring the right partners to the table and solve a problem at the local level. And another example would be, for example, a comprehensive overdose prevention project setting this up. So I want to give it back to the city in case they wanted to add something. But that would be my first response, and I think probably the best example.
Thank you. Mr. Slater?
Thank you, Mr. Munger. We would have nothing to add.
Councillor Stanachek?
Yeah, so one more question. I'm also wondering how this approach can help leverage federal and provincial funding. There was a mention, I think, that Edmonton or Lethbridge has an ability to leverage funding from other levels of government. I do know, like, for one example in Regina, which is not related to this, but an organization called the Regina Unemployed Center helps people who are denied EI with their appeals, and they're very, very successful. So people are back on EI, get EI, and then they're not on social assistance. So the provincial government, it's actually an economic savings for the provincial government. They help fund the unemployed center because of that success rate that they have. Is there an example from some of the other cities of something similar like that, where they're relieving some of the costs of a provincial or federal agency, and that way are able to leverage funding as well? Through the chair.
Ms. Harlech?
Through you, I'll ask Mr. Munger to start, and then we might add after his response.
Okay, through the chair, the leveraging of other opportunities for funding is indeed, particularly through a structure like Reach Edmonton structure, but Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, to give you another example, the ability to leverage other kinds of funding. What we've seen is if you think about the Reach Edmonton example, they have a annual funding that they're getting from the city. I believe it is always between $1 and $2 million. I've said this before. Reach Edmonton is quite a bit larger. Their current budget is somewhere in the $18 million, give and take, depending on the year and depending on the opportunities. So you're essentially you're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the capacity of a city to respond, because what they can do is they regularly put out funding, submit funding proposals to the federal government, to the provincial government, the same with 24/7, and they have the ability then to get funding, and this kind of this initial investment going into Reach Edmonton then becomes much larger and is using leveraging other areas. Similarly with Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council, the way they approached particular issues, there was one issue around treatment of LGBTQ plus community members, and the same with gang reduction work that they did. Not just were they able to go and get funding in other places, outside of the owned region, so Waterloo region, and they were also then being able to bring in all the partners that they had developed through setting up a Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council that allowed them to bring their capacity and resources in. There's some work that was done where they were looking at how much in-kind contributions did we actually get. So we built the table, we have an office, and then every day, essentially, with every project, there is education, social services, addiction services, police, enforcement. All these people are bringing resources to the table, and I see this as leveraging existing resources. There may not always be funding, which then, of course, in the long term should make it easier for the province and for the local services because of the reduction of crime or victimization of people from the LGBTQ plus community.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Stadnichuk. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your work on this. I have a question for the administration. You presented two models. One, an internal model, and one, an external model. And the mind naturally says it's one or the other. And you naturally say, thank goodness, you're not duplicating your bureaucracy. And yet, in the external model, we're being asked to spend something like $600,000 or $700,000 in 3 FTEs. Am I not getting the worst of all worlds here? I've got a bureaucracy externally, and now I've got a bureaucracy internally. I'd just be interested in your answer to that.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll start and then I'll ask Ms. Shaley to add to the response. Yes, as we've indicated, the external, we are recommending the external for a number of reasons. The most pressing would be that an external agency can be a little bit more nimble. They can set the parameters, and they can also, the political influences that change on both the provincial, federal, and our side don't play as big of a factor. And we bring forward all of those groups. The money that's coming forward, as we've said, it's just a placeholder. And once the structure gets fully set out, we'll have the clear numbers. This is about systematic changes and how we work with our partners to make those big changes. And it's important that this is led, as you've heard a number of times, with leadership from all organizations and especially from our own mayor to bring everybody around the table to make the significant changes. When it's internal, it can sometimes get eaten up in our organization. You know, I think the mayor refers to it as the beast. And I think that's part of the challenges that we have. And with an external, again, it being nimble, being able to shift more quickly than our organization could. We still deliver services, or we still have a role to play significantly. And that's why we're asking for the 1 FT. Right now, Mr. Slater is seconded, and we need an area set up so that we can continue the work that we need to deliver from the city's perspective. So that's why we're recommending the external. And we've seen the successes in other municipalities. And this is the model that a number of them are moving towards. So I might ask Ms. Shaley to add some more commentary around this.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Masters. I would have some similar comments to Ms. Harlock. In terms of the skill sets that are required, they would be very similar in the internal and the external models. As Ms. Harlock has relayed, the folks who have been involved in this planning process are seconded from other areas of the corporation. And so we currently don't have a lot of expertise in-house to do this kind of work. The other thing that I'll add is we did talk to some of the folks who are in leadership positions within the community. As examples, Mr. Greg Enyon, who's the Director of Education with the Public School Board, Chief Bray with the Regina Police Service. One of the things we heard from folks like that are that there's really a desire to be involved in a leadership capacity in this kind of work, but they often struggle because they have influence, but they don't have time to undertake the work. And so they have spoke to us about the importance of having folks in place who can help do the policy work and the evaluation and even play that role as a convener in terms of bringing community organizations together to have the right conversations. And we've heard some similar things from the nonprofit sector who would be involved very, very extensively within this plan. There's really a need for capacity to support them to work collectively because they're all very, very busy in the jobs that they currently have within their organizations.
Thank you. Mayor, if I might pursue this just a little bit. Who does the city person, the director or the policy person or the coordinator, do any of those people sit on any of the community action tables?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I might just ask for some clarity. Are you asking about the model, the external model in terms of?
Yes.
So we would see, through this plan, we've requested that one FTE be established to lead the city's role in implementing the plan. That would be a role that would be similar to the role that Mr. Slater is playing right now with this work, and that individual would certainly be engaged in many of these conversations. Sometimes the city's the convener, sometimes a partner, sometimes the lead, depending on the specific action item, the role might vary. There's also a fairly significant role to play in-house within city administration. We talked a little bit about this at the committee meeting. We very much view this as a change management plan. And so even if we're looking within the city administration, there's a role to play in terms of doing a better job with our recreation facilities and programs in terms of creating safe spaces and the kinds of programs that reach everyone. Asking ourselves how our transit services can support the objectives in this plan, exploring how we construct facilities with spaces that are more culturally relevant. You know, we've talked about equity within our park system. So I really think that there's a fairly significant change management role within the city administration as well to ensure that we're fulfilling our role with our core services when we're sitting around the table with our partner agencies.
Through you, Mayor, I'm trying to get my head around how this works practically. How do you, so you've got a community action table set up for a category of social services. And presumably you've got a bunch of different social agencies involved at that community action table. Maybe even all of them sitting together from time to time. There's going to be turf wars here. How do you get them to coordinate their actions in one particular area?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I do feel that Felix or Mr. Munger or Ms. Monette may have some examples of how this has successfully worked in other organizations. These models were put together after we heard very loud and clear from the community that there's a need for collective action. And we heard a desire for agencies to be working together. What they said to us is that they need for the city or another agency to play that leadership role as the convener. Oftentimes they're wanting to work collaboratively and they're struggling with capacity. COVID has been very difficult on the nonprofit sector, and we've heard over and over again that they're struggling with capacity. When the city stepped in during COVID and played a role in terms of facilitating conversations and tables of folks who are sharing information and talking to the province and talking to the health agency, they were quite happy with that model, and they've asked the city to continue to play that role. And so we've taken some of the learnings that we've heard from the community and incorporated them into these models that you see in front of you. So I know Mr. Munger, I think, has a few comments to share. The other thing I want to relay is these are very high-level models in front of you today. And the action plan has suggested that once we hear from council, we need to do some work to lay out more specifically what they would look like and how we would go about building them. But I will turn it over to Mr. Munger to share some examples.
Happy to, through the chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. If I may go back and try to address both, there was the question about not just the turf wars, but how would this look like in terms of these action tables. And so the idea is to bring them together, and I'll talk about the turf wars afterwards, to say that these community groups, and that includes people with lived experience, people in the services, and also then a representative from the city to come around and a table and say, this is an issue that was identified. More specifically, this is what we collectively see as important to go forward to work on. And so from there, the city staff, and somebody mentioned the beast, the city as a beast. A city from an outside perspective is hard to negotiate and understand what's where, and having a link, that liaison, is really core, so that somebody like Dave Slater can be at the table and say, here's the other person from the city that needs to come in here. Assuming, for example, it has to do with youth crime. If it's about youth crime, bringing all the players together that work somewhat related in that field, and then somebody being able to say, this is the person from recreation that needs to come to sit to this table. So your question, does somebody sit there as well? Yes, of course, because the city is part of this. The city is part of the larger solution. Now, with regards to the question about turf wars, I've been on the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. I was on it for about 5 years. Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council is an external organization, now more so than it was at that point in time. And one of the things they did really well is the executive director spent a lot of time getting people to understand why they're here. It's the why at the end of the day. And it was always clear to everyone who came around that table that this was not a table that was going to give them more money, that collectively they may actually go and put in a project that related to the kind of work that they were doing. But this was really about almost working through some of the turf wars. And yes, there is turf wars, but they were extremely successful in bringing, so once a month on the last Friday afternoon, Christiana Sadler, who some of you will have met, was able to bring together the CEOs of the school boards, the police chief, addiction services, social services, to have a common vision and develop that. And that takes time. And then from there, they came together, they talked about issues, they looked at any kind of issue and reflected how do I, if I'm the CEO of a school board, how do I, and what's my role in helping the local community create a safer environment? And it sounds like a perfect opportunity for turf wars, but in fact, it is the perfect opportunities for really truly well-designed collaboration. But it does take time and it does take a process. And that is something that can't be, collaboration is complex. It's the other beast, collaboration. Everyone said, oh, we should collaborate, but it's extremely complicated. So it takes time, but it can be very successful. Instead, in fact, collective impact would suggest exactly that. Complex issues such as safety need a collaborative approach. And that is actually one way of helping to create that collaborative approach.
Thank you very much. It's a helpful answer. I'm going to try one more question if I can through the mayor. So we put in place this structure. How do we stop the provincial government and the federal government from saying, thank God the city's doing it, we're out of here?
Anyone like to take that one? Ms. Howard?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll start, and I don't know if you might have something to say as well. I think it's really about the leadership of that table and bringing all the people together. I think, Camp Hope is a good example where we need to make changes, and I think we're at a point where all the parties know that we have to get together, and there's clear rules of who's responsible for what. What this is doing is taking our leadership role and facilitating those conversations and having that ability to lobby and really bring to the forefront the issues that are facing our community on a daily basis. The community tables or the community action tables are going to have lived experience people on it that can actually bring that forward to the larger political table. So as we've said at the very beginning, the mayor's leadership committee truly has to be those people in leadership positions that can make the true systemic changes that we need in our community and in our province to make things change and happen. And I think with our leadership of our mayor, we'll be able to do that.
Thank you very much for that, Mayor. I'm very supportive of this, and these answers are helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. I hope I got flashing. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation and the work that's gone into this. My concern was similar to Councillor Hawkins, that we're taking another whole, another model, and I just need to know how this model is going to be different than any other model that we've used before. And I guess the question is for administration first. The mayor's leadership committee, what do you see that as? Who is on there? What does that look like?
Through you,
Ms.
Mayor Masters, I might start, and I don't know if Mr. Munger or Ms. Shaley has anything. For us, currently we have the Human Services Partnership, and that has, you know, the police chief, the school board, the public school board, and other people. But they're at lower levels, like they're not the true decision makers. So the difference I see in this with the mayor's group, it's really like ministers that are part of this. It's that level that we need at the table to help us move things forward. The lower level positions, the policymakers and other governments, they'll still be in the background working with the policies, but it's that table that's committed to be there. So it would disband the Human Services Partnership, and we'd be bringing up that higher level with the chief of police and getting the right ministries around the table and the federal ministers or representatives to really make those changes. So that would be the difference that we see today. It's you've got the change makers who are willing to move forward and make those changes. I'm not sure if Mr. Munger or Ms. Shaley has anything else to add.
Mr. Munger?
Do you have something?
Through the chair, not that much, because the specific way and function and design in every city is different, and it's meant to be in a place, or it's meant to have a structure that works at the local level the best. One of the things we would not want to see happening is suggesting that every community across the country does exactly the same, because there needs to be structural ways of creating something that fits in the local context. Having said that, any community or any community in any structure that brings forward the champion and at a high level to be able to drive the messages home at the community level, but also at the in this case the provincial government level, is, in my opinion, very, very useful. We think that having champions, people who speak for it in the community, such as the mayor or the mayor's office and the chief of police, those are very, very valuable and are important for success.
Okay, thank you. So the, I guess the part that, again, I worry about is setting up a whole nother arm of almost a board and then a director, and then you've got staff. And it, you know, we've seen this before with CBOs. CBOs will get money, And what they do is they actually set up the staff to get it going, and then all of a sudden, then every year they need money and more money to get these things, the programming going. So in the work that you've done, for the amount that we're going to, you know, the 700 and 875,000 or the 1.375 million, when you look at that, why wouldn't it be a possibility to bring these CBOs just together? Why do we need all of this, the supports, the staff, a board? Again, like, you know, the model, I know, I see that it just becomes very almost governmenty when we're looking at setting up a whole board. And then we look at a director for $190,000. And then it's another 3 staff for another $465,000. Like, this is not a small feat. And yet we're here, we want to help our most vulnerable, but we're really setting up another business or another, I'm going to say a CBO really. And it's going to be an advocate piece to try and get funding from the government. And I'm not, I guess I worry a little bit about the costing and the modeling, but when I was reading through the document and I heard, I want to ask about people with disability. There's been a lot of contact information here about inclusion and racism, and but I want to know, in your feedback through the people with disability, did safety come up? Did housing come up? Because, and I heard it here about getting jobs. I heard getting jobs for Indigenous people and newcomers, but I did not hear anything about people with disability. So sometimes, you know, we focus on the ones that, or the things that are highlighted in the community, but I do have a question around, and I thought I read in the report somewhere about the disability community was not, or there was only a few that were, can you just elaborate on which organizations or how that was done?
Yeah, I can speak to this briefly through the chair. So we did a focus group discussion with people living with a disability. And maybe Mr. Slater can speak to sort of how the invitations went out and who was tapped into in order to identify those participants. But it was a couple of months ago now, but I believe we had somewhere near probably between 12 and 15 participants come to that consultation. And then, of course, there were a number of questions where people could talk about some of the positive aspects about Regina, and then some of the items or aspects that they think could be improved, or things that make them feel less safe or that impact their well-being negatively. From what I remember, one of the key things that came up was very much around sort of physical environment. And so a lot of the participants during that consultation kept telling us, you know, we can talk about accessibility to services and the types of services that are out there, but a lot of us are facing barriers and challenges to even physically go to those services or seek out opportunities or feel safe when we're going there. So there was a lot of discussion around how to improve sort of the physical environment, removing barriers to access. So that's something that is reflected in the plan, as well as some recommendations around transportation, some recommendation around services. We heard some folks say, you know, just having a list of different spaces and how they're, like how the layout is, for example, that would be helpful. So there were a number of recommendations and challenges that were brought up by that community during that consultation, and very much so around safety, but what I mostly remember was around sort of accessibility and physical environment above all else. And if anyone from administration wants to speak a bit more to the organizations that we reached out to in order to identify some of the participants, feel free to do so.
Thanks, Ms. Manette. Through you, Mayor Masters. Yes, so our process was to work with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and what we did there was essentially we put a call out to the committee and ask them to also do a call out to community contacts and people living with disability, and so we sent to some other, through that was sent to some other community-based organizations as well. So yeah, Audrey's spot on with her assessment. It was very much focused on safety, and I'll say there was a lot of overlap with upcoming work that we're going to be doing as well, with the accessibility plan that comes to council next year, on built environment, on roadways, on all things sort of accessibility. So some items that came up were not necessarily best fit for a safety and well-being plan, but will fit nicely into future plans that the city's leading.
Okay. Thank you for that. We've developed the 6 priorities through this, and so we've known that domestic violence in our province were the highest in all of Canada, so it's no surprise. But these are all key things that throughout these priorities, how will they be deemed? Like how will this process work? I just need to understand. So we've got the mayor's advocacy group, whatever you're going to call that, and then you've got your director, and how does this all come together where you determine what can be done with the government's help? Because again, this is something where many of these, we need the government's help to be able to fund or come together to partner. And so the worry I have is if we step and we start taking on the downloading from taking on more and more stuff that the province is supposed to be doing, then I worry that, that if we take that on, they don't need to. So how is that determined in this process?
Through you, Mayor Masters, if this governance structure is making council feel a bit uncomfortable, I'm going to suggest that it should. It's new, it's different, it's not been done before. So the Mayor's Leadership Committee, and Ms. Horlick indicated, this is an opportunity to bring some very senior level individuals around a table to talk about the social issues and the social pressures that exist in our community today. We will not be taking on responsibilities of the federal or the provincial government, but I think we'll be having conversations around what are the issues that exist in our community, and the 6 areas that have been identified came out of extensive consultation with individuals in this community that have lived experience specific to these issues on a regular basis. So when you have a number of nonprofit agencies coming together, they all have their own interests that they're trying to represent, and in some cases protect, and in some cases look to secure additional funding. The Leadership Committee needs a separate entity, another nonprofit agency that is focused on the collective of looking at how do we deal with the issues in our community today. Ms. Shaley used the example of how the city provided leadership support to bring together agencies during COVID. And Ms. Horlick indicated, the Camp Hope situation. The city, again, brought agencies together and provided the leadership to come up with some, in that case, short-term solutions. So this is really the model that we're looking to implement, and it will require nonprofit agencies to come together today that are providing services to support the very issues that are identified in the plan, but there will be a more comprehensive collective approach that we haven't really had before. And we've had lots of tables, the Human Services Partnership, we bring leaders together, and then leaders get busy, and then it slowly cascades down in organizations. We don't have the right decision makers around the table. So this model really is an opportunity to elevate the conversation and really force the right people to the table. The mayor being the chair of the Leadership Committee, her position demands the respect of the right people being around the table. So it is going to take some time to put into place and to implement, but it is about having the right resources in the community focused on the collective responsibility to solve the issues that are ever increasing in our community. On the other side, we do need some internal resources to make sure that we can be an effective participant, leader, convener, depending on the role that we need to play. So it is new, it is different. The example around Camp Hope, we had organizations that came around the table and they all acknowledged that the type of collaboration that we were undertaking was different than we'd ever had before. This would take it to another level, and I think it's an investment that will really give us a new opportunity that we've not had before to address the issues. And, you know, the 6 that have been identified, they may change over time as well. As we address some of those, we may move on to another emerging issue that exists in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Councillor Bresciani, we have a legislative break 5 minutes ago. You have a couple minutes left on your speaking time and your questioning period. I'm going to ask, could we possibly recess for 15 minutes for the legislative break, come back, and we'll go back to you for your further questioning. Council, that means we're back at 3:35. Are you folks in contact with the consultants, or will we just ask, could we just ask that you pop back on in 15 minutes? Thank you very much. Thanks, folks. 1 minute, council. Welcome back, council. It's 3:05. We'll pick up where we left off. Councilor Bresciani, you had the floor.
Thank you. So just a follow-up question in regards to, so the salaries, and I'll just go back to and it's, so I want to make it clear that it's not that I disagree with this plan. It's more so the communication around it, but also the process and how it will work. But there is also a piece of it, which is the financial piece, that $190,000 for a director, to me, is way too high, and I'm not an HR specialist, but again, that would be a red flag for me. And the salaries in tow, that, again, and the process in which the staffing and all that. So again, that's a concern, but the other piece around the plan in which we're trying to navigate and work together to find commonalities and reach out to the governments, to lobby, I can understand that. I guess the last question would be just around how do we see us in the next, if this goes forward, you know, what's going to be the work and the outcomes? They're going to measure our success, and I'd say the work in the first 6 months, what would that look like? Through you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. I'll start and then I'll ask Mr. Slater. So just on the monies, as we said, we needed to put placeholders in the budget. So depending on the governance structure that is put forward, if it is the recommended one, there is a lot of work that has to be done to refine those numbers. And so those specific numbers, again, were just placeholders, and those things will get refined as we go forward to work out those details. So that might not be the exact amount, and there might be other, like taking some other money. So that all has to be worked out. We needed to put placeholders in the budget. As far as the short-term actions, so that's in Appendix B of your report, and those are the things that we need to do in the short term. And so for us, the number one thing is establishing the Community Safety and Wellbeing Office by hiring that, the resource that's going to lead this plan. And so that would be the first thing that we would be moving forward with. And then getting the terms of reference in place is very important, working with the mayor's office, et cetera, developing job descriptions, all of those things. And then we would be doing other work internally to advance the plan as well. So I might ask Mr. Slater to go through some of those key pieces.
Sure, through you, Mayor Masters. Thanks, Ms. Harlock. So as Ms. Harlock mentioned, the city's recommended action item list, it's within the appendix in the plan. And it was done to show initiatives that we can take action upon quickly. So we've sort of identified items that we want to address from the priorities as soon as possible. Top initiatives that we're looking at would include immediately beginning work on our overdose prevention plan. So this will be a a good first step in a collaborative approach that needs to involve all of these sectors on. And it's an issue that's extremely top of mind for all of the sectors in Regina at the moment. Finish assessment of our social navigation program and make recommendations for a permanent initiative. So right now we're doing some research. We received some funding from the provincial government to do research and analysis on social navigation programs, and these are essentially foot patrol programs, very similar to the BIDS community support program. And these models are seen all across Canada and at sort of different levels on a spectrum of what they do. But essentially they're well-being, they're individuals on foot patrol doing well-being checks. Instead of individuals, getting ticketed or getting arrested, these individuals are there to, see, can I help you? Can I connect you to service? What is it that you need? Is it food, water? So it's really about well-being. So we're doing a study right now to see what a roadmap could look like to seeing a larger initiative like that in Regina on a 24-hour basis. We also want to explore the gap in emergency drop-in space in Heritage, downtown, and surrounding areas. So this came up throughout the plan's research on, okay, we have these connector programs, but where can people go in these particular communities? And we see that particularly in sort of these extreme weather situations. So in winter, this is intensified. In extreme heat in the summer, this is also intensified, and being in the midst of a pandemic, obviously doesn't allow current spaces to have as many people. So we want to have a good look as well at what gaps we need to fill there. Certainly work can begin on setting up these community action tables as well, and sort of wrapping, starting that collaboration with community groups and the ones that'll be working alongside of us. So those are a few examples.
Thank you. And I guess the last question is, we've got, when we look at the recommendations there, on number 6 is a 75,000 one-time, which you just talked about. Then an annual funding of 500,000 in the 22, and that's ongoing for the 500,000, and then an annual funding of an 800,000. Is that correct? See the operating budget.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's all ongoing, annual funding. Okay. I guess just the last question in regards to the finances. We've heard from Ms. Harlech saying that these numbers are, for salaries, are maybe not accurate, but that's the ask. But if we approve it at council and say, yes, this is what you're not going to come back to us and say, hey, well, we only hired a director for 100,000, so that money will be fueled somewhere else, but the ask is still there. Is that accurate?
Through you, Mayor Masters. That's correct. We need to refine the structure if it's external and, excuse me, do the job descriptions and then look at that. And then if there is monies that are left over or not being used, then there'd be a conversation that we would have to have. As noted in the presentation, the 500,000, that's to continue the harm reduction grant program that we had done last year. So that's why that's ongoing. And then the one out of scope FTE, that would be part of the city's role. So that number is pretty firm. But the other part of the establishment of the actual external office has some room as we build it out and figure out what the exact structure will be.
Okay. I think my time is up, but just measurement. I'd like to just ask measurement in this whole process. Outcomes, measurements to successes, how will that be done so we can, understand how the work is and the dollars are being spent. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Masters, I might ask Mr. Munger and then Mr. Slater to go through that, the outcomes and the measurements.
Let me start through you, Mayor Masters. This is something that when we work with communities, we start talking very early on about two things in addition to doing the work. One is, what's the governance structure going to look like? What's the ideal governance structure? Because we do know that, and we've seen it before, that communities who are trying this kind of work got a beautiful plan, and I'm sure you have seen this before as well, a beautiful plan, a great plan, and it gets somewhere shelved. And so that's the one issue that I think is really important to recognize, so this governance structure, and that fits within the second question and is part of the second piece, which is the monitoring. Obviously, monitoring and evaluating the work that's being done out of an office is necessary. This is complicated because as an entity, the idea isn't so much that this entity actually provides services, but improves services within existing systems. And we know that, and I'm not saying this is the case in Regina, but I can tell you, well, let me at least say, I don't want to make a statement about Regina, but we know that in a number of communities, the way community services are working together isn't working, and there's a lot of improvements to be made. Generally speaking, evaluation of programs like an organization or a plan like this isn't so much about outcomes, but it will bring outcomes that are surrounding this. So outcomes around looking at how's the service system working, people's access to food, the kinds of access and calls to police, for example, that are not crime related over time. And this needs to be set up early on with a good logic model, with a good theory of practice. And I believe that should be included, and I believe that's included in the idea of the current structure. And in fact, there is a section on monitoring and evaluation in the plan.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Councillors McKidniak.
Thank you. So I just have a couple of more detailed questions and then some comments. So in the section in relation to domestic violence, one thing I'm curious about is within the current plans, is there the consideration, will consideration be given to the finding homes for folks like survivors of domestic violence with that can accept pets? Like, is this, I understand this is something that's lacking in our community. So is this something that's embedded within the current plans, or could it be?
I'm happy to speak to that briefly through the chair. That's a great question, something that's quite specific as well. And so by including domestic violence as a priority and having a community action team come together to start thinking about some of those more granular details, that's something that we would expect to be brought forward at one of those tables and then be taken into consideration when identifying sort of the actions or the programs or initiatives that could be brought forward. So that's not something that's specifically mentioned in the plan, but certainly something that could come out of a team coming together to identify some of the specific needs related to the priority under domestic violence.
Okay, thank you. I have another question. It's a little bit different, kind of like in relation to food security. It's a bit detailed, but we do talk about in that section of the plan what are specific food security services that we would look at improving or focusing on. And so one thing that I did notice that was missing there is one that I think is a very an easy one for any municipality to try and tackle, which is food recovery. So for those who aren't aware, food recovery is good food that is wasted, currently wasted, but that, so it goes in the garbage for whatever reason, maybe from a supermarket or a bakery or whatever, that could be utilized by other folks in the community. So I did see that as a gap, and I do think that that's something, although a little bit detailed, we do talk about specific types of food security. I would like to see us have a focus on improving food recovery in our community. So how can that be incorporated into the plan?
So if I may respond to this through you, Mayor Masters, this is, again, these are great suggestions, and it's the granularity that this plan doesn't do. This plan sets out a structure of what are the core issues, what are some of the recommendations that could be used, but now the work starts to bring together table. And what you're presenting us with is exactly the reason why the collaborative approach to a particular issue. If food security, if Councillor, you were at the table, you would bring that forward and you would bring that into a conversation with other people in the city that are concerned, that are experiencing food insecurities and that are working on food insecurities to come up to identify, and we're not claiming that we figured out with the consultations across the country with practitioners that we have every single opportunity that is there for Regina. That is the next step. And then identifying and prioritizing which ones make most sense to address first, second, third. But the point is, we're setting the stage with this plan to really dive deep, to bring people together in a collaborative practice, which is the way that these across the country communities are starting to look at this and starting to solve their problems at the local level. Also, by bringing people together, it creates a different way of buy-in when everyone sees their own role in addressing food insecurity and have the opportunity to have a voice in this.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a few comments. I'm not sure if I'll have additional questions. But in relation to the proposed governance model of an external organization, I support that. I think that there's, for some of the reasons that were already outlined, I also think the reporting structure of reporting to a board, a group of folks, instead of one employee, is helpful because it lessens the possibility of having one employee who is maybe not supportive of the plan, or there's turnover in that with that employee, and the impact that that'll have on everybody reporting to this individual and the success of the plan. So that's another thing that wasn't mentioned at this point that I think, for me, speaks to why the external organization is the preferred mechanism for governance with this. In terms of just some comments, I am very supportive of the plan. I have worked in the nonprofit sector in Regina. I've worked there for about a decade, and in food security organizations. And another comment in relation to food security, I know that some of the things that we're planning to focus on are being done in the city within that section there. And one of the organizations I worked for was REACH, and REACH is doing some of that work. Of course, it needs to be expanded. And I know the city has a strong relationship with REACH, so I'm sure that we're hopefully aware of the things that REACH is already doing in that category that we have identified as priorities. But what I did want to say is I want to thank everyone who's involved in the creation of this plan, both the city staff and you all with the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention, and the councillors who put this in motion in 2019. So I also want to recognize those councillors who initiated this process. We've heard that this plan is comprehensive. I think we can see that. And we've heard from you folks with the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention that this is actually not just comprehensive, but more comprehensive than many of the other plans that you've been involved in. And I think that speaks highly of the work that's been done here. It's based on research and best practices. It has the support, this plan, of community organizations and stakeholders. And to me, this is an obvious plan to wholeheartedly support. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zakidniak. I'll go to Councillor Pindura next.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. I want to say, first of all, thank you to the consultants, the city, the community, everyone involved in this. It's a long time coming. I'm interested in starting something. I'm not interested in talking about it. We've done that way too long. We did not invest. We invested very small on a little consulting things, and we didn't put that into the work. We didn't walk. It's time to walk. This thing's not going to fix itself. And we can't wait any longer. And I believe city needs to lead. We can't wait for someone else to start it for us. But I do understand that we need to make sure that the other level of government comes along. They normally do. And if they don't, well, come Marjorie, I think, kind of put a little stamp on what the community can do. So we shouldn't be afraid of that. One question I have that stems from the exploration of establishing a 24-hour community service downtown. What are we talking about that? I mean, what would that look like? I mean, I think Judith Versick mentioned something about doing some patrol, things like that. What would that, is that going to enhance that? Is it going to help her, or what is that all about?
Through you, Mayor Masters, I'll ask Mr. Slater.
Through you, Mayor Masters, thanks for the question, Councillor. What we've heard from the analysis through the community support program is a lot of times they do find people that they want to connect to services downtown or a space, and a lot of times there isn't a space in the community for them to go to, or a safe space. Now we heard this throughout the process of just a safe space to go to, a drop-in space, and we're hearing it, in the current as our weather changes, and sort of in the tone of the Camp Hope discussion, where we hear that in different pockets in the city, and downtown being one of them, where we hear there's individuals looking for sort of those safe spaces to go to. So, and the key point there is that 24-hour time, and this is a gap that Owasso filled last year in having their doors open in 24-hour fashion, which was really unique for our city.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Master, just listening to Ms. Verisak about downtown, and talking about lack of traffic, lack of foot traffic, lack of safety by design, downtown master plan, would some of this kind of fit into what the future is going to bring to downtown?
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity for us to, assess the work of this plan alongside, other future plans for the city, in particular downtown.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Masters, just kind of a few more things here. There was discussion of grants. I'm just going to do an example. I'm not saying anything wrong or saying anything right. Is that I'm going to make a statement about Circle Project, when at times where they came in for grants, we reduced those. So within the plan here, is that going to help, and that going to bring in the groups, let's just pick one Circle Project, to enhance or help with the plan?
Through you, Mayor Masters, a lot of the organizations that we work with in the community already directly relate to the work or the priorities. So these aren't new priorities that exist in our city. These are old issues that need new ways of dealing with them, collaborative ways of dealing with them. So there's many organizations that we know of that will directly align their work, their mandates will directly align with the priorities within this plan, and that we look forward to that.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Master. I'm just going to make a comment, and then we'll be done. I want to make a comment in the employment. And the fact of employment is many levels in that aspect of employment. So in the plan, it speaks to it, where it says employment after terms of incarceration also increases likelihood of reoffending. So that means if the individuals cannot find employment, just making a comment, it just escalates, it gets much more difficult for the individuals too. So this program, the plan, we have to do this, and we cannot not do anymore. We tried not to, I'm not saying we didn't, but that just speaks to itself when you talk about the employment. And you talk about the employment of the individual even thinking that they cannot reach that certain job. That maybe don't have enough, we talked about that before, might not have enough funds to even get themselves some education to maybe reach that job. And that's where this, I believe, is going to look at the very deep and high level of how the community will work out of this. And there's no perfect solution, not enough money that could fix this, but as a community we need to work together, to grants, to organizations working together, level governments, us, community. And I do agree with the leadership of our mayor and council, administration and community, wrapping each other, working together. It's not going to be done overnight, right? So, but at least what I'm saying is that I want to see this thing go. It's long overdue. We need to start walking. Otherwise, like I said, other cities do a lot of things, and this is a perfect example. We are doing it. The comments were made by. This is a great plan, a deep plan. And city manager said I think we should be scared of it because it is a huge undertaking, and I think we got enough strength here around the table that we can do this. So, Mayor, let's get on with this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fundura. Councillor Shaw.
First of all, I'd like to know how many minutes I have. 5?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and the time begins. Have a few comments, have a few suggestions, and have a few statements and questions. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same results and expecting something different. We have been doing that for as long as I've been working with the nonprofit sector. Not once do we talk about education is the one component that will drive a person out of poverty. That's it, education. But yet we as society do not offer education to everybody. And I'll give you an example. My daughter who wanted to be a chef, guess what? She can't go to school to become a chef because she's in a wheelchair and there's nowhere that's adapting to her. My daughter's a swimmer. She can't swim with the university team because they won't allow disabled people. So we need to really get at the root of these problems, and it is education. I'm tired of all of these organizations offering fluffy education, fluffy things to people that really, really need basic education, basic tools. They need their driver's license. They need their social insurance number. They need their grade 12. They need their women's. They need their first aid. They need hardcore skills to go get employment. That's it. That's the only thing that they need. What will end poverty? Employment. What will end the increase in domestic violence? Education. Educate our women to know that we deserve better. Food insecurity? Education. Have a job, get food. Substance abuse. What will lead you out of substance abuse is education and a meaning and a life, something to get up for every day in the morning and go to work. A use. Racism. Once people are educated, the racism will go down. There's a place, and I'd like everybody to look it up, and I have been wanting this in Regina, and I believe that the people in Regina and Saskatchewan deserve this. It's called San Patriano in Remni, Italy. It started 40 years ago by an old, dilapidated farm with not one dime of money from our government. The money came from the donation of a gentleman that donated his farmland to substance abusers who went out and they worked the land, they built something. They had a meaning and they had a reason to get up in the morning. Look at that recidivism rate. 72% of the people that go into there do not use again. do not. Out of the 40,000 people, our recidivism rate in Saskatchewan is 65 to 75%. I worked for a nonprofit organization that brought that recidivism rate down to 25%. They put a present net value of each one of their graduates into our society of $25,000, present net value. Why? Education. I'm going to support this from the leadership of our mayor. I believe in her. I believe that she can take this and do something incredible. But all of these CBOs, all of these places that are wanting money, they're all wanting money. And I know from experience, I've offered them things, they won't accept them. I need to know that this is going to work, that our CBOs, the people that are doing wonderful things in our society, the Northeast Central Community Center, the Rainbow Youth Center, these places aren't going to get bombarded by, oh, well, we're going to not give you guys anything and we're going to give it to these guys. I need to know that this is going to work together, and I'm praying and I believe in our mayor that she will lead this. But this is something that needs to be done for the sake of us, for the sake of our community, the stigma that's attached to it. When you talk about this model, you talk about the structure of this model. The components in this model are going to be designed by what? The leader of this structure? Is that how it's going to be in place through the chair?
I'll let Lori answer. Ms. Shaley.
Through you, Mayor Masters. So the first step in putting together the model is for us to bring back a terms of reference for council's consideration. We proposed some very high-level concepts today because we wanted to hear council's feedback, and then we need to do some engagement with the mayor's office, if the mayor's championing the committee, and with our senior executive, and we would be looking at the models that exist in other municipalities to bring back the details of what that specifically looks like. So that's laid out as a piece of work that we would begin immediately.
I think the discussions have gone on long enough. Like I said, I really am going to trust our mayor. Thank you. That's all I have.
In under 5, Councillor Shaw. Thank you. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I'm going to support the plan. I agree with the model of externalizing it. I think that's appropriate to insulate this group from political influence, including where there might be changeover. And also, I just think, frankly, this body, City Council, doesn't have the credibility to lead this sort of thing. We don't look like folks in our city who occupied Camp Hope, for example, in terms of racial and economic background, and so we need folks who have credibility in the community on those issues. One comment to administration: when you're looking to hire the ED or general manager of this organization, my suggestion is that the criteria privileges someone with existing ties to Regina who might have some relationship with CBOs and might have better buy-in from day one, but I'll support it, whatever that rubric looks like. I think a second comment I'd like to make is I appreciated the infographic that Ms. Shaley showed with the 4 levels of intervention, essentially, and that we've traditionally focused on the more immediate ones. Now we're moving to more systemic change, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But what I would urge council is for us to be patient to see the fruit of that. I think that's the sort of thing that takes longer to solve a particular crime than throwing someone in the back of a police car. It's more dignified, more humane work, but it's going to take longer, and so I ask that we give this time to bear fruit and have serious conversations about it as we go. The final comment I would make is just with respect to the pricing. So I think Ms. Horlock has rightly said the $190,000 for the ED or CEO job was a stand-in at a city-based level. That may well be lower on the external model, and we'll wait to see where that's at. But second, I was initially concerned about putting money into an additional external structure, thinking we could put this to the front lines immediately. We have folks who are unhoused. can't we just give this money to Phoenix Residential Society and they can sort this out? And I was quite heartened at the community wellness level. Melissa Kumu-Benston from the YWCA came to speak. I think she's a remarkable advocate for vulnerable women in the city. And she said she was comfortable with the allocation of resources to setting up a new structure. And for my part, if someone like Melissa is willing to divert funds from the front line to set something up, I would trust her on that point, because I think she's been doing this work for a long time. So that addressed many of my initial concerns and educated me on that point, and I think it's entirely consistent with what our delegates and what our administration has told us. And so I think we ought to trust them on this good work and go ahead with what they've recommended. And I am hopeful that with enough time and with our continued commitment, at least for the rest of our 3-year term, we will see that bear fruit. And even, I'm hopeful, reduce the burden on our police force and potentially allow us to put more money into these outer realms of the circles instead of continuously putting it on those inside tracks. So thanks for all your work on this. And final comment, I suppose, to the folks at Camp Hope who have clearly been animating this discussion today. Thanks for helping to force us to do the right thing. We may not have had the same discussion without your advocacy, so thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor LeBlanc. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you, and through the chair, I just wanted to take a moment and thank everyone who took time to give input into this, all the work that's involved. I'm appreciative of the data and knowledge that's been put forth. I'm supportive of it as well. I don't have any interesting questions to ask. I think that road's been down already, and I just want to take a moment to say thank you everyone for the work and the caring.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. We've heard from all members of council. I believe it's my turn, prior to Councillor Stevens closing it out. I'm going to throw a wrench in this, and only for this reason. I would ask council to look at the recommendations before them. Several months ago, council got together for a strategic prioritization, and this is one of our pillars in terms of our priorities for our term. And we had agreed in principle that when this report came forward, that we would get together as a council informally to discuss the ins and outs, everything from governance to potential action plans, outcomes we're looking for, what have you. This is a framework, and I'm not interested in planning to plan anymore. I would like to plan to action and plan to build. And so, in the spirit of that several months ago discussion, I am going to make a motion to table number 2, number 3, number 4, number 6, number 8, number 9, only for the purposes of getting together with council in December for a few hours to kick around and further flesh out the governance model that's before us. I think it's unbelievably important that we get it right. I am not interested in investing money to get it wrong. And I think everyone around this table has incredibly valid ideas, valid notions of how it could or should work. And as a council, we should work that out amongst ourselves. I don't want to delay it too long. I wouldn't delay it past a few weeks from now. But I'm asking to table it so we can have a fulsome discussion of what this governance model might look like and actually work out the pros and cons amongst us for what we truly believe will get us the best outcome I fully endorse this plan. That's why number 1 is not there. I fully endorse the idea of approving criteria for the expansion of transit and leisure pass distribution, and that is well within the city purview and can be done outside of this. There's a consideration of approval of funding at $500,000. That's already going to be at the budget, so I'm happy to approve that here in terms of that's consideration. But I'm going to ask to table that motion, and I would need a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Ordinarily on a tabling motion, there's no debate, but I'd happy to take comments, or we can just go straight to vote. And if that's a point of order and you'd like to go just straight to vote, I'm happy with that too. Councillor LeBlanc, please go ahead.
Thank you. I suppose I'm going to suggest that this amounts to suggesting that we move in camera and continue the discussion out of public eye, and wonder whether this discussion meets the criteria to move in camera and continue a council discussion out of public eye.
It's actually a tabling motion so that we can get together and have discussion, not an in-camera session. So I would leave the tabling motion stand, and I would completely understand if you want to vote against it. Councillor Stevens?
Thank you. Through the chair, I understand the spirit of the tabling motion. Where I don't agree is with the necessity. If we look at some of the items that you propose, Madam Chair, to table, there's already flexibility built in there for there to be a discussion. So if we're thinking about the terms of reference, the governance model, and so on, we can approve this as it is, and we can request of administration quite easily that as they craft the terms of reference, we can have that discussion. What we have before us is a rubric, a general framework, a set of principles. We can actually get together with administration in this kind of setting that you're discussing, or even as council, to then provide further direction without delaying this. I think this is a needless delay. We've had years to discuss this. We've had presentations. I believe that we should think through these decisions. We've already had months to do that. The expectation when something like this comes to council is that folks have done their homework. They might propose amendments, direction, etc. Council collectively has had over a year to do so. This is kind of the end of the road. I'm not in favor of delaying financially the matter either. I think we've had, and we can see success in some of these harm reduction programs. I think what will happen is, we'll get together, needlessly delaying this project to tinker with what some of us believe should be the governance model, and we could still have this go through the budgeting process I think that's kind of a bit of obfuscation to suggest that we need to stop and think about it when we've already had the time. We know how budgets work. We know how hiring processes work. It takes a lot of time. The more this is delayed, the longer it will take to get this off the ground. And I think that's just needless. I think we can still proceed in the spirit of consultation if we approve this and still have a forum for council independently and with administration to craft what we're asking of them. So I don't think we need to go ahead with the delay. See no value in it. We've had a lot of time to do that, and frankly, people should have done that and put together that homework already.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Hawkins.
This plan conforms with the strategic vision at a high level that this council set out for itself. There are details to work out, and they can be worked out in the future with consultation with us. We've had a lot of expertise, high-level expertise, that has gone into the making of this plan. I don't think there's any danger that the plan will go off the road. I think we're acting on best advice. We've gone through the normal legislative process. Indeed, today we're right at the very end of it. The Operations Committee, Committee of Council, has considered this carefully, recommended it enthusiastically to this council. I think there's some obligation on council to consider, to take into account, to validate the effort that its own committee has made. I worry about the delay. December is a busy month. We're not going to be doing anything else in December other than get past the budget. And we know that our council has another business to do in January. So I don't think to go back now and do a root and branch examination of this plan is warranted. It's a good, solid, high-level roadmap. The details can be filled in and it can be fleshed out. But to delay this further at this point, I think risks killing it altogether. So I will not be in favor of tabling this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Shaw.
I absolutely support tabling this. This is the first time I've seen the money behind anything that we're doing. I haven't seen annual funding of $800,000 through operating budget process. For what? I need exactly to know what this is for, where this is going. Is it going to be $190,000 for a CEO? Is it going to be $110,000 for a CEO? That needs to be discussed. That needs to be worked out. Maybe there's some money that could go into something else. If you guys all say that this is, I've been a counselor for a year. I don't have 10 years of experience coming up with this wellness plan that you guys have been talking about. A year. And it hasn't even been in my face as to the amount of money being used and where it's going to be directed. So this is absolutely irresponsible of us if we were to say this is what we're doing when we actually have never sat down and said, okay, collectively, what are we going to do? What is the best plan of action? What is the money that we're going to spend on this? Where are we going to spend it? This is an outline, yes, but this is not detail. So how could I ever vote on something like this when it doesn't say exactly where this is all going and what it's going to be used for and the added value that's going to add? I mean, I talk about different CEOs or CBOs. 10 different photocopiers. Guess what? If they could all just amalgamate and have one photocopier and one CEO. Like, these are the things that we need to discuss in discussion. This is tax-paying dollars. I want to use it properly and responsibly. And yes, this deserves a discussion in December. Budget, oh well, we got 2 weeks off for Christmas. We got lots of time to read this over and look this over. So yes, I do support this, Mayor Masters. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you, Mayor Masters. I support the table for two reasons. I have read the report, Councillor Stevens, and I think the one big thing that sits with me, I signed that motion when we wanted to bring this forward. I absolutely support the plan, and I think we've heard that. but I don't think there's anything wrong, and I do remember from our strat plan, that was a commitment we made as council colleagues. That was a discussion in our strat plan, that this was a priority, but we were going to have a discussion about it. And I think there's nothing wrong with us taking this back, having it, we were going to have a strat plan discussion anyway. Why not allow this to be part of it? It's not to dilute it, it's to make sure we're all clear on the process and how it's going to work. We've offered Mayor Masters to be our spokesperson. That's great. Have we consulted? Has there been consultation around how that's going to work? Have we talked about what that would look like in her subcommittee? These are important discussions. These are important things, so, because that's a huge key piece of who sits around that table. And that means a discussion. And I don't think delaying this by 2 weeks from our mayor who has asked for that, to me, I don't see, I don't see the need to rush it. I think 2 weeks, and in all due respect, if that's the discussion and that's the request, I absolutely support it.
Councillor Zakidniak.
Thank you. With respect, I cannot support the tabling motion. The purpose of this meeting today was for us to have a fulsome discussion about this plan. We've been consulted about this plan multiple times. Those who are on the Community Wellness Committee have been consulted even more, but those of us who are not have had sessions, briefings on the development of the plan, embedded within the recommendations, the parts that are potentially on, that have been asked to be tabled. Many of them, if not all of them, are coming back to council anyway. So embedded within those recommendations is the opportunity for council to provide feedback. I think if we are to table this, it negates the great work that administration has already done with the Canadian Municipal Network on Crime Prevention, the experts in this field. Certainly we have valid opinions, those of us on council, but for us to pretend that we're experts is more so than the folks who've been working on this plan for months. I don't feel that we have, that our opinions can help the plan, but we certainly don't have more expertise in this area than these folks who've been working on this plan. And just to note that if we table this till December, as noted, we have a break in December. So, you know, our last council meeting, regular council meeting, is on December 8th. This would be tabling it till sometime in January at the earliest. So it's not a small delay. And while we delay, it's not that we're talking about something that doesn't have grave consequences for an action. People are dying in our community. So there are grave repercussions for us taking our time and trying to get something perfect. We won't have additional clarity of how it'll be perfect in December. We won't have all the answers. We can't have all the answers. We just need to get started on this important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zakidniak. Councillor Mancinelli.
Thank you. First, is there any estimate on when this would be tabled until? Or any confirmation or?
Councillor Mancinelli, I think the intention would be to try to have it in the next couple of weeks prior to budget.
And we can make sure that's a pretty firm couple of weeks? It wouldn't spill over into the new year, do you think? Or is there a chance of that?
Well, I can make it happen, so as long as council can attend.
Okay. I'm comfortable with making the decision today myself, but I don't think I'm going to be the face of this decision. And with that in mind, being that the mayor's asking for the tabling, I'm comfortable in supporting the tabling. Personally, I believe the information's there and the importance is there to make the decision today, though. So I guess you guys know what I'm thinking. I'm going to vote.
Thank you, Councillor Mancinelli. Councillor LeBlanc.
Thank you. I have Point of order I'd like to raise with respect to whether this tabling motion complies. I would first request maybe direction from the clerk as to whether the deputy mayor should be the one making that decision, given that it's the chair's tabling motion, which I'm raising the compliance of.
Happy to have Councillor Stadnicek, apologies, Cheryl. Councillor Stadnicek make the call. Mr. Clerk?
I think Councillor LeBlanc, with respect to the decisions that were taken last night at council with respect to changing that requirement in the motion or in the procedure bylaw, and owing to the practice that has been undertaken for the past few months with COVID, where we were dispelling with this historical notion of changing the chair, I would respectfully suggest that the motion is in order, because for the practical purposes, it doesn't make any difference. Having said that, if you feel that the mayor has overstepped, you can raise a point of order, and it can go on the record if successful as changing this and having someone else move the motion. From my perspective, there hasn't been any undue influence here. The mayor took her opportunity as during her time to speak to raise something, and if it's defeated, she will retain her 4 minutes and 40 seconds to continue her portion of the debate.
I'll continue with the particular point of order with respect to it. So I'm looking at 20 sub 10 of the procedure bylaw. Indicates a member moving a motion to table any matter, whether the matter is contained in a petition, inquiry, motion, or any other matter before council, shall include in the tabling motion, and here I say there are 3 options. 1, the time at the present meeting, comma, or the date of a future regular or a special meeting to which the matter is to be tabled. My view is that means if you're tabling something at council, it can only be to another council meeting, not to a strategic planning session out of public eye. And so my position is the proposed tabling motion does not comply with 20 sub 10, so is invalidly made, so it can't go to a vote. And I would request a ruling on that.
I will do my best, Councillor LeBlanc, given that I was also speaking with the mayor on a related matter in this regard. There's 2 ways to look at this. The mayor has the authority to call a special meeting of council at any time. She does not need consent of council to call a special meeting. So as part of this tabling motion, she could call a special meeting of city council for X or Y date, and then you could immediately move in camera. I mean, the spirit and intent of this is she wants to, I believe, if I understand correctly, wants to table this to a special, this would come back to a council meeting. Any strategic planning session of council, as per the auspices of the FOI Act, cannot make a final decision. It's very clear in the Act. But you can meet for a strategic planning purpose. So, I mean, the city solicitor may want to also weigh in on this.
I think to Councillor LeBlanc's issue, though, according to the bylaw, I have to tell the date that it's being tabled to.
And you can do that, and as I said, Mayor, you have the authority to call that meeting unilaterally.
Right, but I would have to include a date, because I can call a special meeting immediately following the strategic planning session, as long as I attach a date.
That's right.
Just to finalize, put a point on it. Okay, understand. Mr. Weary?
Your Worship, I think it would be advisable for the tabling motion to be tabled to a future meeting. If there's a strategic planning session that is going to happen in between, that probably needs to be dealt with separately as a strategic planning session if it's in proper form and follows the correct procedure and the exceptions in the LA FOIP Act. That could occur, but in my view, the tabling should be to a future council meeting.
Understood. So table it till December 8th, like if I just included the date of December 8th. Understood. I think that's completely fair. So if we amend this, you're my seconder, Councillor Bresciani, you're all right with that? You go ahead, because the intent would be to have a strategic planning session prior to December 8th, just to make sure that we put a point on it in terms of a finite date. I'm fine with that.
Do this, we can't make decisions except in public. And I would be very nervous about the appearance that the public would have if we had a strategic planning meeting on this specific issue and then went into a city council meeting. It raises serious transparency issues.
Thank you. I don't disagree, Mayor Masters, with Councillor Hawkins' point. I just want to remind council members that you are afforded the opportunity at any time to meet in a strategic planning session. The fact that it is potentially very close or adjacent to December 8th is interesting, but not necessarily improper or illegal. As I've mentioned before, final decisions must be made on the floor of council in public.
Councillor Stavic.
Thank you. I also want to speak against the tabling of this motion. We have had quite fulsome discussion on this report. There is quite a detailed budget and an explanation that in some of the cases those numbers are placeholders. I also believe that we have engaged in some very, very exceptional consultants who have worked on this, and we have some very exceptional staff who have worked on this, who have consulted really broadly in the community, and they have brought forward this report that I don't see any reason why we'd want to unravel any of the threads that have been woven together to create this community safety and well-being plan. So I'm opposed to tabling it.
Thank you. I believe all members have spoken, except for Councillor Fundura.
Question, is this tabling going to hurt anything for 2 weeks, whatever time? I understand that there's a great plan. We've talked about this. Like maybe I might hear something different. I know there was comments and questions about the money, funding, and all that. So if there is some kind of a issue in that section, I'd like to know more. So I'd like to see this thing go, but at the same time, I would like to see more. I'd like to hear what the mayor has to say. One way or the other, this is going to go forward. I don't think we're stopping it. So I mean, it's just a request. I mean, we have so in light of that, I'd like to see a little bit more about things. And I know we don't meet in private. We don't make decisions in private. This has just been coming in for quite a while, but I don't see that this is going to trip itself. We're already way too far ahead of it to trip anything. We've already dedicated a lot of resources and time to do this. I don't see a reason for it to stall or derail or change. So I will support Mayor's motion to table.
Thank you, Councillor Fundura. I believe everyone has spoken. City Clerk, could you please call the vote?
Councillor Mole, as you are in transit, would you indicate your vote, please? Councillor Mole, you're on mute. We need your vote whether you are in support of the tabling motion or voting against the tabling motion before we display the results. Press *6 on your phone, please.
Oh, no.
We can hear you. Councillor Mole, if you can hear me, please recall in again. Okay, he is having difficulty. If council, I have it on record here, it is on my phone. If you accept that, Councillor Mole votes in favor of the tabling motion. And I will keep this on the record if anybody disputes what he is saying. And the deputy will fill in the rest of the vote. So it was 5-5 with Councillor Mole's vote in favor. The motion is tabled to December 8th special council meeting. Yes, but we have Councillor Mole in favor, which makes it 6-5 in favor, Councillor Hawkins. Yes, technology might, we will reflect that in the minutes. We just don't have the technology because he's away.
With that, Mayor Masters, it's basically done. We're done.
Councillor Slevens, I believe you can close off debate. The item before council are recommendations number 1, number 5, and 7.
Madam Mayor, just give me 1 second so I can identify the 1, 5, and 7 in my agenda here. I just want to see that for myself. Okay, I guess I'll be salvaging some scraps here. I guess this meeting was a complete waste of time, which is unfortunate since we scheduled it to deal with precise issues that we're now going to deal with in private and then come to public. I'm at least hopeful that there is some money here in harm reduction. Interestingly, the same folks who voted against that also want to table and proceed with further deliberation about the structure. I think we have a good plan. I think we have a framework to advance with an advocacy, a leadership, and a policy-making process that changes the way that we deal with complex issues in our city. I think organizations like Fire and Protective Services are already doing this along with the RPS. The community wellness strategy that we've discussed pushes us ahead and changes the way that we respond to existing crises. This will be something that we can talk about down the road, but ensuring that folks who experience poverty, racism, and all the issues identified in the plan are actually staffing and responding to those issues in the community is important. I'm hopeful that this isn't something that's derailed through the budget process and that council can come to some consensus on what the structure looks like. That was still possible. But at the very least, we have some financial skin in the game when it comes to harm reduction funding, which is doing some important work in the community if we look at who's received it and the kind of initiatives that we're willing to advance. So I guess I look forward to further discussion about this. And I hope that council will consider supporting and not tabling the remnants of the recommendations.
Can I, City Clerk, please call the vote on the motion as amended.
Mayor Masters, the vote on portions 1, 5, and 7 is passed unanimously. It is 11-0. Councillor Moll has also indicated his interest in voting in favor.
Thank you very much, Council. May I have a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Councillor Hawkins, a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Any opposed? None. Thank you very much, Council, for the good debate today.